Hey guys, tonight we float back in time. Not to the days of dinosaurs, oh no, way too mainstream, but even further. Past the Jurassic, past the Triassic, past all the screaming and teeth, you settle down into the deep hush of the Carboniferous period, about 300 million years ago, where the air is damp, the ferns are tall, and the bugs, well, the bugs are bigger than your dog. Picture dragonflies with wingspans as wide as your kitchen table, centipedes that stretch longer than your couch, and the kind of mosquitoes that would absolutely ruin a picnic. All in air so rich in oxygen, it could practically ignite on a strong sigh. It's quiet now, humid, and green in a way your eyes don't quite recognize. Mosses stretch higher than your head, and the sky is always just a little misty, like someone turned down the contrast on the world. It's dreamy. It's weird. It's insect-ruled. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're listening from some sleepy corner of the world, let me know your time and location in the comments. I'm always curious. Now, dim the lights, maybe open the window for that soft wind blow, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ground beneath you is springy, a mat of decaying plant matter, layered thick like a forest's memory foam. Each step releases the musty perfume of wet roots and fungi. You don't walk so much as float, brushing gently past tree-like club mosses, their spiraled scales tickling your sleeves. Overhead, there's a slow beat of wings, an insect, but not the kind you could swat away. It's Meganeura, the buzz of its flight deeper than a hummingbird, more resonant than a cicada, its wings stretched over 2 feet across. You glance up as it glides, and for a heartbeat, it blots out the sun. But we'll talk about that sky tyrant in a bit. For now, let's talk about the world it ruled from above. This is the Carboniferous, a time when the Earth experimented with life at full volume. No mammals yet, no birds, no flowers, just primitive plants, some amphibians doing their best impressions of lizards, and bugs. So many bugs. And the reason they're thriving in a way they never will again. Oxygen. The atmosphere back then was saturated with it, up to 35% compared to today's 21%. You breathe in and feel it hit your lungs like menthol. It's thick, supercharged, like the air at the top of a roller rink during the fog machine phase. That extra oxygen didn't just make things easier to breathe, it changed biology. Insects don't breathe like you. They absorb oxygen through holes in their exoskeletons, spiracles that let the gas seep in and wind its way through tiny tubes called tracheae. But those tubes only work so well. Today, insects are limited in size because they just can't get enough oxygen into their bodies fast enough. Back then, oxygen was basically on tap. Bugs could be enormous because the air did most of the work for them. There's a kind of lazy logic to the way these prehistoric insects move. You watch as a massive centipede, its body gleaming with dew and mystery, coils between rotting logs. It doesn't skitter like the little ones under your fridge. No, it saunters. It's not afraid of anything. Why would it be? It's a segmental tank, 30 legs of low-speed confidence. Up above, another insect sails by, its wings shimmering with a faint oil-slick hue. A 6-winged oddity called Paleodictyoptera. It moves like a leaf caught in a sigh, and you have to blink twice just to make sure you didn't imagine it. Scientists still argue about what those extra wings did. Were they for steering, gliding, or just a strange evolutionary dead end? The debate continues like a soft background hum, much like the one in your own ears now. The Carboniferous forest feels alive in a different way than modern ones do. It breathes more. It pulses. It seems to be digesting itself. Trees crumbling into thick, tar-colored goo. Leaves decomposing before they even finish falling. And beneath all that, the bugs are having a buffet. Beetles, some larger than your palm, crawl along every available surface. They munch, they clean, they break down the world's messes like janitors with far too many legs. It's not glamorous, but it's essential. Even now, bugs are nature's cleanup crew. Back then, they were the only crew. You pass by what looks like a tree trunk until it twitches. It's an insect called Proto-Cymex, possibly an early relative of cockroaches. And yes, those little survivors go back this far. Even now, their ancient ancestors are watching you, antennas flicking like whispering fingers. Roaches are eternal. Try not to think about it. Everything here glistens. The air is so wet, it practically hugs you. There are no flowers, no birdsong. Instead, the forest drones with wing beats and the occasional thunk of something landing on a log. The colors are dark and jewel-toned, deep green, rusty brown, slick onyx. And somehow, everything smells faintly of mushrooms and wet stone, and then you see it. Up on a tall fern, poised like a jungle gymnast, is something small, maybe 6 inches long, with wings too big for its body and eyes too many for its face. It doesn't have a name. It's a fossil footnote. But it watches you with a kind of alien stillness. You stare back, feeling, just faintly, that you are the one being studied. There's a fringe theory, just the sort of thing that gets whispered over academic coffee, that some prehistoric insects might have used subtle wing vibrations to communicate over long distances, almost like forest Wi-Fi. No one can prove it, but the idea lingers in the air like a vibration you're not quite sure you felt. And somewhere, far off, the hiss of a sea scorpion breaches the silence. You lean back into the underbrush, letting the ancient sounds cradle you like a song you forgot you knew. You don't hear Meganeura before you see it. You feel it. The pressure shift, the breeze it leaves in its wake, a shadow crossing your chest like a drifting sail. And there it is, gliding just above the fern tops like it owns the sky, because, honestly, it kind of does. Meganeura, your new nighttime escort, is not a dragonfly, but it sure looks like one. It's technically a distant cousin, a griffinfly, and that difference matters, at least to the scientists who argue about it in sunless labs. But to you, watching it float silently through the hazy carboniferous canopy, it's just a prehistoric sky ghost with veined wings the length of your arm and eyes so wide they nearly wrap around its head. Each wing beats with a deep, sleepy rhythm, the kind of sound that makes your eyelids droop. It's hard to believe this thing is real. It moves too gracefully for its size. There's no frantic buzzing, no darting panic. Instead, Meganeura glides with absolute confidence, scanning the understory below for anything that twitches. It's a predator. Yes, a bug that hunts other bugs. You spot one now, a smaller insect with the unfortunate timing of taking off just as Meganeura descends. The kill is silent, surgical. Wings pin, mandibles click, and the meal is airborne again before you fully register the drama. No roar, no blood, just one life ending quietly in another's grip. Its eyes, compound and vast, see in a kaleidoscope of motion and shimmer. Meganeura doesn't just detect movement, it feels it in stereo. Some researchers think it could spot prey while still half a meter away, even through dense foliage. Others argue over just how fast its brain could process visual information. Bug brains are weird, efficient, strange little command centers that can fly, hunt, and mate with almost no conscious thought, if insects even have such a thing. And the wings. Oh, the wings. 4 of them, stiff and translucent like cathedral windows made of mica. You can see the veins, like highways of air and light, branching out in perfect geometric patterns. You remember tracing similar shapes on your window pane as a child, following the frost lines with your fingertip. Meganeura's wings shimmer when the light hits just right, flickering like oil on water. And though they look fragile, they're incredibly tough. Evolution doesn't waste material on aesthetics. That elegance is functional. You move slowly, dreamily, through the thick underbrush, trying not to startle the creature. Not that it notices you. You're a ghost in this world, a drifting observer. Meganeura swoops again, this time snatching a roach-like insect mid-air. Crunch, quick, final. The hunter returns to its perch, a wide frond of a tree fern, and begins to feast. There's something unsettling about watching an insect eat another insect so delicately. It doesn't rip or tear, it nibbles, precise, careful. You're reminded of someone eating sunflower seeds one by one. It's that tidy. You glance around, half expecting something bigger to swoop in and take it out. But there's nothing. No birds, no bats, no aerial predators above this thing. Meganeura is the apex flyer here. Top of the food chain. The sky tyrant with wings like stained glass. Of course, not everything was so peaceful between humans and this oversized dragonfly, if humans had been around, which we most definitely were not. But imagine, for a second, walking out to check the mail and a 3-foot insect dive bombs your head because it thought your hair moved funny. There's no amount of bug spray that could fix that. Back in the real world, some scientists have argued that Meganeura probably wasn't all that fast. Big wings can mean more gliding than darting, like a hang glider rather than a fighter jet. That's a relief, maybe. But then again, it didn't need speed. It had range, visibility, and a world full of smaller prey too slow or too dumb to notice death overhead. You crouch near a shallow pool, its surface covered with algae and ringed with soft, wet moss. Meganeura dips low for a drink, its reflection briefly touching its own face. You half expect it to nod politely at itself. Then it's off again, tracing the tree line, wings almost silent except for that low, resonant thrum. Not all researchers agree about how Meganeura managed such precise flight. Some say it had the unique ability to control each wing independently, giving it insane aerial maneuverability. Others argue that its flight was more like a tandem bicycle, wings working in pairs, gliding with efficient, steady grace. There's still no universal consensus, though fossil wing structure gives us some pretty strong hints. The scholarly debates continue, like a low-grade academic soap opera. Wingtips and Wingbeats, Season 278. You watch Meganeura land again, this time on the bark of a lepidodendron tree. More like a tall, moss-covered pole than anything you'd recognize as a tree. Its legs grip with practiced ease, sticky pads clinging without effort. You try to picture its weight. It's heavier than a modern insect. It has to be. But its exoskeleton is built for it, lightweight yet strong, an architectural marvel hidden in a bug's shell. There's a weird little fringe theory, brought up only occasionally at bug conferences and usually with a nervous laugh, that Meganeura might have had simple vocalizations. Not words, obviously, but subtle clicks or purrs made with wing movement. No hard proof, of course, just a few too many strange fossils with odd ridges near the thorax. Might be noise-making, might be nothing, but the thought lingers like a whisper on the wind. As the light dims around you, though it never really gets dark here, just dusky, you catch Meganeura lifting off once more. Its wings beat slow, like an old record playing at half speed. You follow it for a while, ducking under branches, stepping over enormous roots. It's not fleeing, it's just moving on, looking for more food. Or maybe a mate, or maybe just because it can. You don't know it yet, but this is the last time you'll see it tonight. The forest shifts around you, leading you toward even stranger creatures. But for a moment, you look up and watch that great bug sail across the prehistoric sky, alone and unchallenged. Just a winged shadow, passing like a thought across the face of the ancient earth. The air wraps around you now, thick as warm syrup, and even your thoughts feel slower. You wade deeper into the carboniferous soup, where the atmosphere hums with potential, and every breath feels like it's doing a little more than it should. That's the oxygen, 35%, remember? It's like nature left the faucet running. You inhale again, and your lungs practically purr. You glance up at the sky, though it's mostly hidden behind the green-tinted ceiling of ferns and moss trees. The light that filters through is golden and heavy, like it had to wrestle its way through layers of steam and spores just to reach you. The world feels a little unreal. And maybe that's fair. This isn't just a different place. It's a different physics, that excess oxygen. It's not just good for bugs. It's the reason they got huge. You remember Meganeura's wings brushing the canopy like a whisper, or that millipede that took up most of the trail. All of them were supersized by design, thanks to that breathable buffet line in the sky. You walk a little slower now, letting the idea settle. Oxygen is usually the background music of evolution, important but understated. But in this chapter of Earth's history, it's the lead singer, and it's belting out solos. Every breath a bug took was turbocharged. Insects don't have lungs like you. They have those weird little spiracles along their sides, like tiny vents that lead into a maze of air tubes or tracheae that deliver oxygen straight to their tissues. In today's world, that system limits how big an insect can get. You can't be the size of a hawk if your breathing system runs on passive airflow. But back then, the air itself did most of the work. All that extra oxygen just flowed in, like the atmosphere was helping these creatures inflate. You pass by a rock the size of a pumpkin, covered in the glossy sheen of moss and thyme. Except, it moves. Legs uncurl, feelers test the air. A beetle bigger than a frisbee clambers slowly across the undergrowth. Its shell, a smooth dome of onyx with coppery highlights. It looks up at you with complete disinterest. This is its time, not yours. Of course, nothing lasts forever, not even giant insects on an oxygen high. There's some disagreement about what exactly ended their reign. Maybe it was the climate cooling. Maybe it was the arrival of vertebrate predators who started snapping up bugs like snacks. Or maybe, as some paleontologists suggest with that practiced academic shrug, the oxygen levels dropped. Less breathable air, smaller bugs. Simple as that. Well, mostly simple, because even now, there are gaps in the logic. The timeline doesn't perfectly match up. Some insects shrank before the oxygen dropped, others after. It's not a clean cause and effect, which is great if you like open debates and mildly exasperated science professors. Not so great if you're a giant bug counting on good air to keep your body from collapsing under its own weight. There's a paper, whispered about like forbidden fan fiction, that suggests some species may have actually evolved ways to boost their own airflow. Muscle-assisted tracheal pumps, sort of like flexing your body just to breathe harder. It's controversial. Not many fossils preserve internal structures like that. But the thought of a 10-pound dragonfly doing isometric breathing exercises, weirdly charming. You step into a clearing now, where the vegetation parts into a lazy pond ringed with horsetails taller than telephone poles. The surface of the water is still, too still, and then ripple. A massive water bug crests the surface, wings twitching, legs skimming the ripples like boat oars. Another victim of over-oxygenation. It turns slowly in your direction, and for a second, you get the distinct feeling you've been noticed. Then it sinks again, like a dream retracting into sleep. Here's another fun fact. High oxygen didn't just make the bugs big. It may have made fires huge too. More oxygen in the air means easier ignition, and once something caught fire, it didn't stop easily. The Carboniferous was essentially a tinderbox wrapped in soggy moss. Even wet wood could go up in flames. There's evidence of forest fires that tore through entire regions, leaving behind charred layers now fossilized into bands of black coal. Kind of poetic, really. The very life forms, thriving in oxygen-rich air, were also one errant lightning bolt away from barbecue. Some scientists argue, of course they do, that the regular occurrence of fires helped shape the evolution of these forests. That constant reset button, burning everything to the ground, opened new space for fast-growing plants and quick-breeding bugs. It's ecological chaos theory. Burn it all, start again, grow bigger. You settle onto a spongy log, which sighs under your weight like an old couch. All around, the chorus of insect wings rises and falls like sleepy waves. The air smells faintly of vinegar and mold, with a top note of something sweet, like overripe figs. You watch a butterfly-like insect the size of a salad plate flutter by. Its wings beat slow, as if it's tired from evolving too much. Even the predators here seem lazy in their dominance. They don't chase, they wait, they float. They drift through a world built for them, a dream fueled by air so generous it made evolution greedy. There's another theory, whispered in some paleobotany circles, that the plants themselves helped create the oxygen spike, not just by photosynthesizing, but by being really, really bad at decaying. Their woody tissues, full of lignin, resisted breakdown. Dead trees piled up. Carbon got locked away instead of being re-released. More oxygen stayed in the air. Plants accidentally overstocked the shelves, and the bugs cashed in. So here you are, in a world where the forest accidentally poisoned its own future, where bugs got too big for their britches, and air got so rich it made life both possible and dangerous. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you can hear the forest breathing, not in gusts or breezes, but in that constant, low hum of photosynthesis and exhalation. The rhythm of a planet inventing itself, and all around you the insects rule, quietly, absolutely. The swamp narrows now, drawing you through a corridor of towering club mosses that lean over the path like nosy neighbours. Their bark is knobby, almost scale-like, and flecked with streaks of algae that shimmer with each droplet of condensed mist. You can't help but reach out to touch one. It's damp, spongy, and just warm enough to feel alive. The world hums softly, thick with tension, as though something is about to happen. And then you see it. The Eurypterid, a sea scorpion, though the name doesn't do it justice. Scorpion makes you think of dry deserts, stingers, and maybe an annoying childhood memory of a zoo trip gone wrong. But this creature is something else entirely. It's ancient, armored, aquatic. It lurks in the dark shallows of a brackish inlet just ahead, half submerged, half draped in time's long forgetting. You ease closer. It's massive, longer than your arm span, with a flat paddle-shaped tail twitching at the water's edge. It's not the largest ever found. That prize goes to Jacalopterus, whose fossilized remains suggest a body over 8 feet long. But this one is big enough to make you think twice about dipping your toes. The Eurypterid stirs. 2 large claws, like oversized salad tongs tipped with teeth, rise slowly from the water. Its carapace is ridged and colored a deep, tarnished bronze, like something salvaged from a shipwreck. The eyes, though, dark, not quite lifeless, but unreadable. You get the strong impression it sees you and just doesn't care. You're too big to eat, too small to threaten. It shifts again, water rolling off its armor in soft rivulets. The Eurypterid moves with surprising grace, pushing itself deeper into the shallows. Its legs are spindly and jointed, like they were borrowed from a spider, and each one settles onto the muddy bank without a splash. Now, here's the part that bugs paleontologists. Nobody quite agrees on how these creatures walked. Some say they scuttled sideways like modern crabs. Others insist they could lift themselves up and lumber forward in a slow, deliberate crawl. A few fringe voices even suggest they swam more than walked, their paddle tails acting like rudders through the silty estuaries. The truth? Probably a bit of everything. Eurypterids were the Swiss Army knives of prehistoric mobility. You notice now that it's not alone. Further down the inlet, 3 smaller Eurypterids huddle in the reeds. They're juveniles, maybe, or a completely different species. Scientists are still sorting out the dizzying taxonomy. Some Eurypterids lived in fresh water, others liked it salty. A few might have ventured onto land for short spells, their gills doubling as primitive lungs if kept moist. But the details are still foggy, like trying to read a half-erased chalkboard underwater. Your foot sinks slightly into the bog, and the soft squish gets their attention. The smaller ones vanish with a flick, slipping beneath the surface like thrown spears. But the big one, the one still watching you, holds its ground. It raises a claw again, almost lazily, like it's waving you away, or testing the air for something it doesn't understand. You stay still. The rules here are simple. Don't provoke, don't panic, don't blink too fast. Eurypterids lived long before the dinosaurs. They were some of the top predators of their day, back when the competition was mostly trilobites, jawless fish, and each other. They had armor for defense and claws for offense, a combination that gave them nearly 100 million years of dominance in Paleozoic waters. That's right, million. You know how long humans have been around? A fraction of that. Eurypterids were the boss-level crustaceans before crustaceans even knew how to have bosses. But even legends fade. Eventually, fish got smarter, faster, meaner. Jawed predators moved in. Eurypterids started losing their hold on the underwater throne. Some adapted, some didn't. By the end of the Permian, they were gone, swept off the evolutionary stage during the biggest extinction event the planet's ever known, the Great Dying. But for now, in this preserved slice of soggy paradise, they are still here, still slow, still powerful. There's a myth you once read, a misquoted internet thing, that Eurypterids inspired early sea serpent tales. Total nonsense, of course. They were long extinct before humans ever showed up. But you can imagine it, can't you? A creature rising from the water, claws extended, eyes unreadable. It doesn't have to be real to be remembered. The big one stirs again. It turns away, finally bored with your presence. It drifts back into the shallows, kicking up lazy clouds of mud and algae. You watch it vanish, the tip of its paddle tail flicking once before it disappears completely. The reeds close behind it like curtains. As you move on, the ground beneath your feet begins to firm. Less squelch, more crunch. You're entering higher ground, though high is relative in this ancient sponge of a landscape. You brush past a thick frond, startling a chorus of smaller insects into flight. And somewhere, unseen but close, a low churring begins. Some kind of mating call, maybe, or a territorial warning. It echoes strangely, like a recording played backwards. You think about that Eurypterid again, how old its lineage was, how confidently it moved. And for a moment, you're not in a swamp, but inside a museum, standing in front of a dusty display case. Behind the glass, a replica of a creature once thought impossible. Too big, too alien, too forgotten. But here, it's just part of the background noise, just another chapter in a world ruled by bugs. You're further inland now, though land still feels like a generous term. Everything's a bit squishy, a little too green, a little too alive. The trees, if you can call them that, aren't woody in the way you're used to. They're spongy and hollow, mostly made of water and stubbornness. And wrapped around their trunks like holiday tinsel gone rogue are the early conquerors of vertical real estate. Giant millipedes, Arthropleura. You nearly trip over one. Or maybe it nearly trips over you. The thing is long enough to shadow your body twice over, a black and bronze centipede trail of armored plates undulating over mossy soil. It doesn't seem bothered by your presence. In fact, it doesn't seem to care about anything other than moving forward in its slow, methodical ripple of legs. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all tapping the ground with polite insistence. Arthropleura. The biggest invertebrate ever to walk on land. It's the sort of fact you could drop at a dinner party if you wanted everyone to lose their appetite. Up to 9 feet long, almost 2 feet wide. Not venomous, not carnivorous. Just a living log with somewhere to be. You crouch next to it. Up close, the segments glint slightly, each one like a plate of ancient armor. The surface is dotted with small ridges, probably for muscle attachment, though no one knows for sure. The underside remains a mystery too. Fossils usually show the top half. The rest is up to guesswork, illustrations, and that one guy at the Natural History Museum who gets way too into his 3D reconstructions. There's a long-standing debate among paleobiologists. Did Arthropleura have a tracheal system like modern bugs, or something more advanced? Some think it had specialized chambers to help move air. Others argue it didn't need to. Again, thank that overly generous carboniferous oxygen buffet. The air back then practically climbed into your lungs on its own. But here's where it gets weird, because despite being the heavyweight champion of invertebrates, Arthropleura eventually disappears, vanishes from the fossil record. No dramatic extinction scene, just gone. A few tracks here, a fragment of shell there, like it slithered off stage and forgot its cue to come back. One popular theory: as forest changed and the oxygen dipped, Arthropleura couldn't hack it anymore. Its sheer size made it vulnerable to a world no longer inflated with breathable luxury. Another idea: vertebrate predators. As the first amphibians and reptiles got teeth, the slow-moving millipede log may have found itself on the menu more often than it liked. You reach out and almost touch it, but stop. It might not be dangerous, but it's still alien. You watch its rippling progress with quiet awe, like a subway made of muscle. Suddenly, from behind a moss-covered stump, another one appears. Smaller, maybe half the size. The two creatures meet briefly, if you can call it that. There's no sound, no touch, not even an antenna twitch. They simply glide past each other like ghost trains on separate tracks. Whatever communication they had was silent, or internal, or unnecessary. Above you, sunlight fractures through the canopy, splitting into beams that light up floating clouds of spores and insect wings. Everything smells like mildew, copper, and wet bark. Somewhere nearby, water bubbles gently. A spring, or maybe something less innocent. You hear a dull rustle from behind and glance back. A shape moves among the ferns. Slow, lurching, deliberate. Not a millipede. This one has legs. 4 of them. And a body somewhere between a lizard and a salamander. You step aside quietly as the creature, an early tetrapod, ambles into view. Not quite reptile, not quite fish. Something in between. A why not in the evolutionary timeline. It regards you with fishy, unfocused eyes. Then it freezes, and it sniffs. It sniffs you. That's new. You remember reading somewhere that some scientists think these early land vertebrates were the tipping point. The arrival of competition that ended the reign of the giant arthropods. Smaller at first, slower, but smarter. Bones instead of exoskeletons. Internal lungs. Teeth. Plans. You stare at each other for a few long seconds. Then, just as abruptly, it turns and flops its awkward self back into the undergrowth. A soggy thud, then gone. You glance back at the trail where the millipede had been. It's still moving, completely unbothered. But maybe, just maybe, something in its ancient nervous system knows that the age of bugs will one day come to a close, that muscles and brains are starting to catch up, that soft things with bones will eventually win, but not tonight. Tonight, Arthropleura still rules this patch of forest like a train, with no brakes and no destination. And you're just a passenger, catching glimpses. A breeze moves through the clearing now, cooler, scented with distant pollen. You feel your pulse match the rhythm of the millipede's legs. Tap, 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 a gentle metronome of deep time. And then, just before you move on, a subtle detail catches your eye. Fossilized in a rock nearby, half covered in moss, is an impression. Dozens of tiny indentations, curved like commas, pressed in a steady line. An ancient footprint. A record. Proof that once, this forest belonged to creatures who measured their world in segments and silence. You brush the moss away gently, exposing more of the trail. It winds out of sight, into the dark. Still there, still moving, even if only in stone. You follow that fossilized trail a little way before the undergrowth swallows it again, as though the forest itself is determined to keep the secrets of its former giants hidden. But you're curious, insatiably so. Why, you wonder, did a world exist where bugs could be the size of dogs, millipedes longer than an average sofa, and dragonflies with wingspans wider than your bed? And why did it all collapse like a souffle left too long in a hot kitchen? It's not a simple answer. In fact, scientists toss around hypotheses like children launching pebbles into a pond. Some skip, some sink, and some just create ripples of confusion. You remember Meganeura's silent glide from Section 2, the gentle thrum of wings beating through golden-green light. You recall Arthropleura's armoured segments rippling in Section 4, its head disappearing into the shadow of a trunk that might as well be a skyscraper made of moss. Those memories are anchors as you drift into the tangled debate of insect gigantism. Here's your first mainstream fact. Oxygen levels peaked during the late Carboniferous, reaching up to about 35%, nearly double what we have today. Such hyperoxygenated air allowed insects, which rely on passive diffusion through their tracheal system, to absorb massive amounts of oxygen directly into tissues. Imagine inhaling a single breath so powerful it fills your body twice as efficiently. For our six-legged friends, it translated into exponential growth potential. Why run on a hamster wheel when you can sprint on jet fuel? It's weird to think of oxygen as both a life giver and a size enabler. You breathe in and your lungs purr like a half-asleep cat. Nearby, a giant centipede would have breathed just as easily, if only bugs could purr. Some researchers claim that insects back then could afford to grow big, really big, because oxygen was like an all-you-can-breathe buffet. But there's a quirky tidbit worth whispering. Not all giant insects were simply bulked-up versions of their modern kin. Some, like the peculiar Paleodictyoptera you glimpsed in Section 1, had 6 wings, an evolutionary wing plus 2 that no one's quite sure about. Some paleontologists joke that these creatures were basically Jurassic-era drones with extra rotors. No consensus, of course, and you will find yourself lost in the scholarly debate phrase. Wing venation homology and functional aerodynamics remain contentious, a sentence no sleepy mind can fully untangle on the first try. So, oxygen gave them a head start, but that's only half the story. Another mainstream fact, predation pressures shifted as vertebrates, amphibians and early reptiles gained strength, speed, and smarts. A snack-sized bug could survive today's bird-stepped skies. But back then, you might have needed an exoskeleton thicker than a house's siding, just to avoid becoming someone else's evening meal. You picture that amphibian from Section 5, its fishy eyes betraying a silent hunger, perhaps eyeing the millipede's softer underbelly. Yet the details remain fuzzy, like a half-erased chalkboard in a museum you visited once. Paleoecologists still argue whether vertebrate predation was the main reason giant insects shrank. Some point to trackways indicating that a growing variety of tetrapods stomped through these swamps, flattening logs and insects alike. Others counter that giant arthropods often lived in niches where quick-moving predators couldn't match their bulk. They might have thrived in canopy layers or muddy lakes where amphibians were less nimble. The scholarly debate phrase rattles around again. Trophic cascades and niche partitioning in late Paleozoic ecosystems are not definitively resolved. So, oxygen and predators, check. But there's a third piece, the plant world itself. Remember in Section 3, how you watched smoky forest fires tearing through endless ferns and club mosses. That wasn't a quirky firefly show for the bugs. It was a reshuffling of resources. High oxygen made fires both easier to ignite and more voracious. When a lightning bolt struck, the once soggy forest could explode into a blaze. And fires, though destructive, cleared space for fast-growing pioneer plants, fern-like species that offered bugs new salad bars and hiding places. One open scholarly debate phrase, fire regimes' influence on paleoentomological diversification is equivocal, meaning some experts argue fires catalyzed insect diversity, while others say the chaos simply pruned giant species unable to find refuge fast enough. In your half-dream world, you can almost hear the crackle of an ancient flame, feel its heat nudging your skin as a plume of smoke twists above a fern forest, the size of a small country. Through all this, think about the fractal-like nature of the Carboniferous ecosystems. Insect burrowers, like cockroach ancestors, tunneled under decaying logs, aerating the soil. Huge millipedes shredded plant matter into bits, speeding up nutrient cycles. Dragonflies and their kin hunted from above, keeping certain insect populations in check. It was a feedback loop. Oxygen-rich air nurtured massive arthropods, who then influenced the environment, which fed back into the carbon and oxygen cycles. Then something started to change. As the planet shifted, ice caps grew at the poles. Yes, ice during the Carboniferous, even if you can't picture it yet. Glaciation sapped water from the seas and lowered sea levels, draining inland swamps that once sprawled across continents. Lakes and wetlands shrank. Lush forests retreated to narrower bands along the equator. Plants adapted, favoring tougher, more decay-prone types. Lignin-rich gymnosperms began to replace the soft, easily decomposed ferns and horsetails. Fossil evidence shows that lignin-heavy trees resisted decay, trapping carbon in soil and rock, which in turn lowered atmospheric oxygen. All this conjures another scholarly debate. The relative timing of oxygen decline versus floral turnover remains debated, meaning no one's certain if plants changed first, or if oxygen levels dipped first. The forest's collapse might have led oxygen to drop, or vice versa. Did insects get the memo? Or were they too busy munching on mosses to notice the warning signs? Either way, by the late Carboniferous to early Permian, oxygen levels had fallen below the threshold needed to support bug titans. Trachea couldn't pump enough oxygen into massive bodies without that previous 35% air concentration. Bug lungs, so to speak, caved under their own weight. Fossil records show a gradual shrinkage. Wing veins in insect fossils become finer, leg segments shorter. Bulkiness fades like an old dream. Still, here and there, you find outliers. One emailed note you read late at night mentioned a fringe species, supposedly surviving into the early Permian, clinging to life in an isolated swamp unaffected by global shifts. The evidence? A few fossil fragments, partial wings, bits of exoskeleton, so ambiguous that most paleontologists dismiss it. A few stubborn souls cite it at conferences. Possible Carboniferous relics near equatorial refugia merit re-examination. Cue the eye rolls and hushed laughter. But for someone drifting through time, it plants a seed of wonder. What if some bugs had a secret bunker under tons of rock and peat, waiting for humans to stop helping them? Roaches, cough cough, to stage a comeback. You stroll past a stand of lepidodendron trees, their scaly bark rippling with faint green luminescence as dusk falls. The ground's texture feels like a memory of rain. Somewhere ahead, you hear a faint tick-tock. No, that's just a beetle's mandibles clicking. Nothing to worry about. It's primal, meditative, hypnotic. As you drift, you see a scattering of insect tracks in muddy sandstone, fossilized in relief like sculptures. Each line and groove tells a story. I existed. I moved. I was part of something bigger. You catch a glimpse of a small insect scampering across a rock, a relative of modern cockroaches, tiny, humble, unassuming. It survives based on adaptability, not bulk or fancy wings. That little critter is a reminder. Evolution doesn't always favor size. It favors flexibility. And as the world cooled, habitats shifted, and oxygen thinned, the small, nimble survivors thrived. Consider the open debates surrounding insect respiration. Did some bugs evolve muscle-driven tracheal pumps to eke out the last drops of oxygen? Or was evolutionary selection simply weeding out the bulky in favor of the lithe? No one really knows, but the whispers persist. Functional tracheal compression in late Paleozoic insects is underrepresented in the fossil record. In plain English, maybe certain bugs evolved tiny lung assist pumps, but fossils won't confirm or deny that neatly. As your vision blurs slightly with the ebbing light, you sense the Carboniferous world receding, trees dimming, shadows lengthening, the hum of insect wings softening to nearly nothing. Soon, the age of giant bugs will be over. Their reign, however impressive, was ephemeral, a brilliant, over-oxygenated fireworks display that lasted a few tens of millions of years, an infinitesimal wink in the grand timeline of the planet. But for now, as you stand on the threshold where giants once strode, or rather, slithered, you recognize that their legacy survives in every insect you've ever tried to swat. The beat of butterfly wings in a summer breeze, the click of a cricket in the night, the flash of a lightning bug, all echo faintly the grandeur of a time when wings could blot out the sun and legs could stomp vines into submission. A final chuckle bubbles up inside you, a soft, sleepy joke. If a million-ton behemoth ever rose from the depths and asked you to leaf blow its backyard, you might just owe it a favor, given everything it did for oxygen levels. But that's absurd, of course. Or is it? After all, every time you switch on a light without second thought, you're benefiting from the carbon locked away by those ancient forests, shaped in part by insects. There's a cosmic symmetry in that. A reminder that the tiniest, most overlooked creatures can shape planetary destinies. You exhale, and for an instant, you feel the air thin, almost like a sigh after a long exhale. The forest hushes, and you watch as small ants, each no bigger than a fleck of dust, carry bits of decaying fern across a rock. They're doing exactly what their ancestors did all those millions of years ago, breaking down life so new life can emerge. It's a cycle bigger than any single creature, giant or tiny. You turn, ready to move on, knowing that the carboniferous bug giants have already begun to fade. But in their place, new life waits in the wings, smaller, faster, and just as determined. The world shifts under your feet, as though breathing once more. You step into a shallow inlet where sunlight filters through the hanging fronds of crimson club mosses, turning the water into a drowsy gold. The air here tastes faintly salty, like the sea whispered a secret before drifting inland. It's quiet, too quiet, until you hear a soft whoosh from beneath the surface, and the water ripples as if acknowledging an unseen presence. You remember that Eurypterid from Section 4, the one whose claws emerged like ancient sentinels. Well, tonight you meet its cousins, the scorpion ancestors who spent more time swimming than stalking desert sands. Eurypterids, those sea scorpions, were not true scorpions, but they shared a distant branch of the tree of life. Picture a scorpion silhouette stretched into a sleek submarine, paddling through murky Paleozoic waters. In fact, some species, like Pterygotus, could reach lengths of up to 2 meters, nearly as long as a human teenager. That's right, imagine diving in a lagoon and spotting what looks like a metal-plated eel with pincers. You'd probably reconsider snorkeling for a bit. A mainstream historical fact: Eurypterids thrived from the Ordovician to the Permian over 200 million years, making them one of the longest-lived arthropod lineages in Earth's history. They occupied niches from coastal marshes to tidal flats, sometimes tolerating both fresh and brackish water. Some even ventured onto land briefly, perhaps clinging to moist sediments, but their realm was undeniably aquatic. You step closer to the water's edge, toes sinking into warm, yielding mud. Thick mats of algae cling to your footwear, leaving a faint green sheen. Suddenly, a triangular shadow glides beneath the surface. Its tail fin oscillates with effortless grace, sending concentric ripples outward. The creature rises, Eurypterus remipes, the archetypal sea scorpion. Its carapace glistens like burnished bronze, and its long, segmented body juts behind it in rippling arcs. You exhale slowly, feeling that familiar itch of wonder. And maybe a hint of, "please don't eat me," adrenaline. This isn't a fossil exhibit behind glass. It's a living, breathing predator from another world. You cup your hand to gently brush aside a low-hanging frond, revealing its swimmerets, those paddle-like appendages along its abdomen, working in unison like an old rowboat crew. Each stroke propels it backward with deliberate slowness. It's not in a hurry, and neither are you. There's a quirky tidbit you learned somewhere in a midnight Wikipedia deep dive. Some Eurypterids had tiny, spiky sensory hairs on their limbs, which might have served as mechanoreceptors, tiny seas that felt water currents, like minuscule underwater antennas. Imagine if your fingers could detect the flutter of a housefly from across the room. These ancient critters could probably feel the faintest tugs of a struggling fish before it even came into view. Pure sci-fi vibes. Above water, the shoreline is alive with rustling ferns and distant insect wings. But underwater, the Eurypterid's world is silent. No buzzing, no chirps, just the muffled swish of its own movement. You lean close, watching its limbs carve patterns in the silt, stirring ghostly swirls that drift like cosmic dust. There's something hypnotic about it, mesmerizing enough to make you forget the clock on your wall, the to-do list you left behind, even the fact that your phone is probably blinking with notifications. The Eurypterid glides forward, its eyes, compound, multifaceted orbs, reflecting slivers of pale light. You think about how modern horseshoe crabs are its distant kin, still scuttling along muddy flats today. Those spiky tails, They're not stingers. They can't sting you even if they tried. Instead, that long spike, the telson, probably helped with steering, flipping itself right side up or embedding in soft sediment while ambushing prey. No venom, no drama, just practical engineering. There's an open scholarly debate phrase that drifts through your mind. The functional morphology of Eurypterid appendages in relation to prey capture remains contentious. In plain English, scientists are still arguing over whether those robust front claws were meant for wrestling fish, snagging crustaceans, or maybe even grappling with rival Eurypterids during some prehistoric mating ritual. The evidence comes from a few spectacular fossils, showing them locked in what looks like a life or death embrace, possibly two males fighting over a female, or just sparring buddies showing off. It's like discovering a frozen hug in time, where you have to wonder, was it romance, rivalry, or something stranger we haven't guessed yet? You ease your hand onto a low rock, leaving a small handprint on the smooth surface. It's comforting and unsettling to feel something so old, older than most living things on Earth. You run a fingertip across shallow wave marks, fossilized millions of years before anyone thought to ask, what if we had camera phones? Modern beaches have nothing on this. Each ripple here is a ghost of freshwater currents from systems long gone, now preserved in stone. Suddenly, a smaller Eurypterid darts past the larger one, flattening into the silty bottom. Its limbs pause mid-stroke, and it hovers in place, fins quivering like a hummingbird caught underwater. It's waiting, hunting. You swallow a pleased gulp of steamy air, your breath mingling with the damp aroma of decaying ferns. The stillness wraps around you like a soft blanket, a lullaby for your inner scientist. Above you, a frond snaps, and you taste wood smoke on the breeze. A reminder that forest fires aren't strangers here, as explored back in Section 3. Those carbon-choked blazes provided nutrients, reshaped habitats, and occasionally flushed Eurypterids from shallow pools into splashing, desperate runs into deeper basins. Anecdotes in paleontological journals hint that some species might have been able to withstand low oxygen conditions. A fringe musing titled Aerobic Thresholds in Late Devonian Eurypterids. Could they have walked across soggy dunes, gill-like structures still clinging to life? We're not sure. The evidence is scant, but the idea persists like a whispered rumor in a sleepy lecture hall. You shift your weight, sending a small pebble tumbling into the water. It lands with a plop that seems loud, too loud. The Eurypterids flick their eyes toward you, but neither one approaches. They're curious, but cautious. After all, you're an interloper wearing no carapace, swinging no paddletail, and waving no claws. To them, you're probably a blur of oddly shiny shapes and awkward limb movements. Moving on, you follow the soft incline of the shore, wading through knee-deep water that smells faintly of brine and pollen. The inlet widens into a broad lagoon, dotted with half-submerged logs and mats of algae. A chorus of distant insect wings hums above, maybe a callback to that lazy Paleodictyoptera from Section 1, now hunting in twilight. You feel like an extra in a sci-fi epic where the protagonist has yet to show up. There's something strangely comforting about the rhythm of these creatures, even though, logically, you'd rather not share its habitat. Your heart beats slower, matching the gentle pulse of the water and the slow arc of that larger Eurypterid's tail. A soft chuckle escapes you. Okay, maybe I'm part fish now. You tease yourself, though your arms remain decidedly finless. A bit further in, the mud gives way to fine, grainy sand. You pause to examine a fossilized ripple mark, those delicate crests formed as water filtered around a log, like the still image of a wave in a never-ending ocean loop. You run your finger along the edge. It's crisp, preserved. Beneath the sand, tiny tracks spiral outward, possible trilobite trails, or the forerunners of the beetle burrows you saw back in Section 5. The layers of history press in on you, thick as the air back in Section 3, but denser, like a whisper you can't quite make out. As dusk creeps closer, the Eurypterids begin to move toward deeper channels. They tilt their bodies upward, paddles churning, and slip beneath the surface without a sound. You watch their tails flick once more, a silent wave goodbye. The water around you calms immediately, the ripples fading like echoes after a lullaby ends. Standing at the edge, you feel a soft squelch as you shift. The shoreline is marked by occasional exoskeletal fragments, molted skins shimmering pale under the golden light. These shed shells hint at growth spurts, eurypterids shedding old armor to make room for new. It's a subtle reminder that even these titans of the shallows were once small enough to slip beneath the rocks, vulnerable and unknowing. You take a deep breath, tasting the mix of decaying vegetation, algae, and ancient salt. The world around you, though foreign, feels eerily familiar. After all, those eurypterids helped shape marine ecosystems that would someday give rise to fish, then amphibians, then reptiles, the very lineage that led, way down the branching tree, to you. Cosmic irony for a sleepy ASMR ramble, perhaps, but you let yourself smile. One more fringe thought drifts through. Some paleobiologists have speculated that certain eurypterid species might have exhibited simple burrowing behavior, digging into silty bottoms to escape predators or extreme temperatures. They cite rare fossils of curled-up eurypterids, preserved in what look like burrow casts. If true, then sea scorpions might have been early architects of underwater hideouts, the original man caves of the Paleozoic. But as always, evidence is sparse, and the argument stalls under the phrase, burrowing behaviors in Eurypterida are highly speculative given current ichnological records. You shake your head, settling into the sensation of damp air and the faint hum of insects returning for the night. Although the Eurypterids have vanished for now, you carry their slow, steady presence with you. You step out of the lagoon onto firmer ground. Well, firmer compared to the sodden shoreline. The spongy soil of earlier sections gives way to thicker mud and eventually to the firmer forest floor, where fungi glow dimly and millipedes still lumber. The shift in textures underfoot is almost imperceptible, like sliding between scenes in a dream. A gentle breeze rustles the club moss fronds, carrying the promise of nighttime in the Carboniferous. Quiet, misty, a bit mysterious. You pause, look back at the inlet where the water gleams like molten gold in the dying light. You think about those eurypterids slicing through the shallows, tail and claws working in seamless harmony. And though their kind will dwindle in the Permian, replaced by sharks and fish with bony jaws, for now they remain the unchallenged sovereigns of these waters. You exhale a soft sigh, remembering the gentle thud of millipede legs from Section 5 and the click of Meganeura's wings from Section 2. Each memory is a thread in this living tapestry. The world feels infinite, layers upon layers of stories you're only beginning to unravel. With that, you shuffle forward into the undergrowth, the murmur of the forest rising like a lullaby. Scorpion ancestors who swam, dragonflies who ruled the canopy, millipedes longer than sofas, they're all here, drifting in the margins of your mind as you drift deeper into the Carboniferous night. The water's hush fades behind you, but its memory lingers, a gentle reminder that life can conquer even the deepest of seas. You sink deeper into the undergrowth, letting darkness filter in like a soft blanket. The canopy above blocks most of the lingering light, and the air grows cooler, heavy with moisture that clings to your skin like a damp quilt. A hush settles, but it's not a silent void. This is the Carboniferous at night, where even darkness buzzes. You recall the muller of insect wings from earlier sections, Meganeura gliding overhead, Arthropleura lumbering along, Eurypterids patrolling the shallows. Now, the nocturnal world awakens with a different cast of characters, each adding its own note to a swampy symphony. First, the hum, a low, steady vibration that seems to emanate from everywhere at once. You strain your ears and realize it's hundreds of tiny wings beating in unison, like an army of airborne fans on low speed. It's a mainstream fact that many Carboniferous insects were nocturnal, avoiding midday heat and diurnal predators. Without the sun in their eyes, they hunted, mated, and navigated these murky skies with ease. That chorus of hums you hear could be swarms of giant mosquitoes. Don't worry, they don't carry malaria yet. And lacewings the size of your hand, fluttering in gentle arcs just beneath the frond canopy. As you pause, a rustle in the leaf litter draws your attention. Something the size of a basketball skitters through the darkness, antennae flicking like crossed alternative facts at a science conference. You flick on a small lantern, dust motes swirl like tiny galaxies, and glimpse a creature both familiar and foreign. A giant cockroach, about as big as your palm, its carapace reflecting that faint yellow light. These early roaches, some nearly a foot long, were among the first insects to colonize dry land fully. Quirky tidbit. Fossilized roach poop called coprolites hints that they were already scavenging decaying plant matter 300 million years ago. Basically, the original dumpster divers. You let the lantern dim, relying on moonlight that filters weakly through the fern fronds. The roach retreats under a fallen log, antennae waving goodbye like a tiny adversary worried you might steal its tiny bug beverage. You grin, flicking a joke into the darkness. Hey buddy, don't worry. Best I can do is bite-sized snacks, and I'm off my bug-eating diet tonight. A soft, almost imperceptible chuckle wafts through the trees, and you imagine 1,000 roaches responding with muted applause. Behind you, a rustling crescendo builds. In the distance, you hear a faint chirrup, somewhere between a frog and a cricket. Amphibians are venturing closer to water's edge in search of mates. You remember that early tetrapod from Section 5, the one that sniffed at you like it couldn't quite believe humans existed. Its descendants are croaking in unison now, calling for partners. That croak, while not as loud as modern bullfrogs, is a constant reminder that vertebrate life is creeping in, even as insects maintain their reign. Some paleontologists believe these amphibians used low-frequency vocalizations to call across swamps, a fringe theory because no fossilized vocal cords survive. Yet they argue vocalization in early tetrapods may have been more advanced than traditionally assumed, leaving us to wonder if, somewhere beneath the surface, a frog ancestor was already warming up its larynx for karaoke night. Your path winds through a copse of club mosses forming a natural cathedral, their tops swaying in a gentle breeze that sounds like distant waves. You step over a thick mat of horsetails and find yourself at the edge of a small clearing where the air feels almost electric. All around, fireflies, or rather their carboniferous cousin, the Protolamporidae, emit faint, bioluminescent glows. Don't expect modern synchronized light shows. These insects let off random pulses, more like malfunctioning tiny flashlights, but still enchanting if you squint just right. Scientists debate whether these early bioluminescent bugs used light to attract mates or to ward off nocturnal predators. The open scholarly debate phrase floats through your mind. The function of bioluminescence in late Paleozoic elateroids remains unresolved. In other words, it's either a prehistoric nightclub or a bug warning system, your choice whether you dance or flee. You stand perfectly still, letting the cadence of the swamp's orchestra wash over you. There's a distant plink as something, probably a small amphibian, jumps into a pool. Plop. The water shivers, and ripples expand like forgotten memories of eurypterids splashing in Section 7. A chorus of bubbles hisses as fish-like early vertebrates dart below the surface, perhaps chasing unsuspecting insect larvae. You note that gnats and mayflies, some nearly 2 inches long, hover above the water, their wings catching the dim glow of those proto-fireflies. Mayfly larvae, known as nymphs, spend years in the water before briefly emerging as winged adults for a single day. Imagine going through high school and college only to have a one-day prom night. Talk about commitment issues. To your left, a faint clicking draws your gaze downward. A small device, a cockroach-sized beetle, taps its mandibles against a pebble, creating a rhythmic click-click-click echoing across the clearing. It's a mating call, a challenge, or perhaps the carboniferous equivalent of someone tapping their pen in a quiet library. Scientists are still unsure exactly what these click beetles communicated. A fringe hypothesis suggests some clicks could serve as sonar, letting them detect echo patterns in the dark. bug echolocation, if you will. The phrase acoustic signaling in Paleozoic coleoptera requires further empirical evidence, sings in your mind like a lullaby gone academic. You grin and whisper, echolocation? Great, just what I need. Bat-like bugs hunting me in my sleep. Suddenly, the constant buzz dims as an overhead silhouette glides by. You look up and catch a flash of 4 wings folded at rest, iridescent green and gold. It's a Paleodictyoptera, one of those 6-winged oddballs from Section 2 and Section 3. Tonight, it moves like a stealth bomber, nocturnal by necessity, hunting at the edge of visibility. Its compound eyes reflect just enough light to reveal millions of individual facets, each gathering slivers of starlight. You remember scholars debating whether these creatures navigated by moon phases or simply by random drift. The debate bubbles. Nocturnal orientation in Paleodictyoptera may have involved polarized light detection, a phrase so abstract even your over-caffeinated brain has to take a deep breath. Further still, you hear a low rumble, like distant thunder but without rain. A giant millipede, an Arthroplura descendant no longer at 9 feet but still the size of a small dog, trundles through decomposing logs. Its legs tap a slow drumbeat against the forest floor, each click resonating in your chest. When it passes, you feel an almost inaudible vibration, like someone turned up the bass on a forest subwoofer. You chuckle softly, thinking, great, now the world's creepiest drum circle has started without me. For a moment, you let yourself drift. You think of how the plants exude a faint, musty perfume at night, mingled with the sweet, slightly sour bite of decaying ferns. A scent so primal it bypasses logic and goes straight to something deeper, like your inner sleepwalker, gently nudging you toward a trance. You inhale deeply and feel your eyelids grow heavy. But you press on, determined to map this nocturnal soundscape. A faint, high-pitched trill cuts through the hum, a cricket cousin, approximately the size of a small bird's egg, sending vibrations through nearby twigs. It's a mainstream fact that early Orthoptera, the group including crickets and grasshoppers, evolved stridulatory organs, specialized wing veins that rasp together to produce sound, during the Carboniferous. These early engineers of background noise refined their songs over millions of years, culminating in the familiar serenade you hear in many modern backyards. You wonder if the bugs of 300 million years ago appreciated subwoofers. Just then, the air shifts. An unseen breeze rustles the fronds, carrying with it a hint of something smoky. You remember the fire-prone nature of this hyper-oxygen world from Section 3, how entire forests could ignite, leaving behind layers of charcoal. Even now, a flicker of that memory lingers in the air, so slightly you might confuse it for a dream. But it's real enough to make you shuffle closer to the club mosses, seeking refuge beneath their dripping leaves. Beneath those leaves, you find a family of tiny amphibians huddled in a shallow crevice. Their eyes glow faintly in your lantern's reflection, innocent, unblinking. They shift as you approach, their spindly legs scrambling for purchase on slick moss. You recall that these early amphibians had simple vocal sacs and might have squeaked soft, squealy songs when threatened. One scientist, bless their cautious heart, suggested these squeaks could be so high in frequency we wouldn't even hear them without special instruments. Auditory range in early amphibians may have exceeded modern mammalian thresholds, he wrote. And you believe it because tonight, everything seems possible. You watch one hatchling slip into the mud, leaving behind webbed toes that meld into the earth with a quiet slurp. The rest follow, as if obeying some unspoken signal. For a moment, the clearing falls silent, just for you. Then, on cue, a burst of insect wings stirs above. The click beetle returns to its percussive solo, and the giant millipede resumes its bass line. It's a transition so seamless you think it was scripted. But this is nature, and it's always improvising. Above you, the stars peek through openings in the canopy, tiny pinpricks of light that seem too delicate for this intense world. You tilt your head, imagining the same constellations shining down 300 million years ago. Or maybe the stars were different back then. Has the night sky changed that much in geological time? Another open debate. Paleo-starfield reconstruction remains speculative due to uncertainties in continental drift and atmospheric opacity. Basically, we're not sure if Pleiades glittered above this swamp or if the view was more smudged, like frosted glass. Your heart slows further, lulled by the ancient crescendo. A cricket's rasp, a beetle's click, a millipede's tap, and somewhere in between, the soft whoosh of giant wings passing overhead. You lean against a mossy log and close your eyes for a second. In the darkness behind your eyelids, you see flickering phosphorescent glows, proto-fireflies winking in the gloom, and feel a million tiny legs brushing past you as nocturnal insects pass by on silent patrol. You let out a sleepy chuckle. All right, Mother Nature's DJ set is on full blast. I surrender. And in that moment, as the forest orchestra lilts you toward drowsiness, you realize you're part of the performance. Your breathing, your heart, your pulse, they all become instruments in this primordial jam session. It's not just a swamp at night. It's a living, breathing, buzzing tapestry woven by creatures ancient and tiny, big and bizarre, all playing their part in the symphony of life's earliest hours of darkness. As your eyelids drop and the world around you hums on, you drift toward dreams filled with giant wings, scuttling legs, and the faint, echoing mantra that life, even in its most monstrous form, can be a lullaby if you just close your eyes and listen. You drift through the wet gloaming of the Carboniferous forest, senses tingling as the hum of nocturnal wings from Section 8 fades into a distant lullaby. Above you, the canopy parts just enough to let slivers of moonlight slip through, illuminating motes of pollen and the occasional flutter of insect wings. You follow a faint, almost ghostly outline in that pale light, brushing aside mossy fronds to reveal a creature that feels like a glitch in the dream. Paleodictyoptera, the six-winged oddball that defies your imagination. It's hard to describe at first. 6 wings, yes, 3 on each side, arranged like an avant-garde paper airplane gone rogue. The upper 2 wings are slender, almost lace-like, with veins that shimmer like knots of stained glass. The middle pair is broader, offering lift, while the lower pair flutters just above its slender abdomen, adding a curious, ghostly cadence to its flight. Your brain does a mental double-take. Wait, am I seeing too many wings? But no, you're not. This insect is like a proto-drone, sporting an extra set of rotors nobody asked for, but evolution granted anyway. You creep closer, careful not to startle it. Its tube-like mouthparts, proboscis-like, though it's not sipping nectar like a butterfly, hang just below a head crowned with bulging compound eyes. They gleam in the moonlight, each lens catching stray beams like thousands of tiny mirrors. You can almost feel it studying you, its multifaceted gaze flicking from your shoes to your face, as if wondering what Anthropocene mishmash you are. Here, as a mainstream historical fact, Paleodictyopterans inhabited the skies and forest margins roughly 320 to 299 million years ago, and they were among the first insects to evolve powered flight with well-developed wing venation. These creatures could reach wingspans of about 30 centimeters, about the width of your laptop, making them formidable aerial presences, even by Carboniferous standards. Today's dragonflies might outnumber them, but back then, they commanded their own exclusive niche. You watch as this one flits forward, the 6-wing choreography so smooth it's like a tiny ballerina performing an aerial cotillion. Its legs dangle beneath its body, tipped with tiny claws that could anchor to bark or fern stems in a heartbeat. You get the uncanny sensation that those claws are poised for something more than perching. Maybe snatching prey? Or perhaps they serve to hook onto branches during those gusty swamp breezes. No one knows for sure. Which brings us to the scholarly debate phrase, lingering like an echo. The aerodynamic utility and evolutionary origin of the accessory pair of forewings in Paleodictyoptera remains contentious. In other words, scientists are still arguing whether those extra wings were true flight surfaces, stabilizers, or evolutionary leftovers pleading for a purpose. Your heart tugs at a memory from Section 2, Meganeura's graceful glide, its four-winged silhouette blotting out the golden light. Compared to the six-winged Paleodictyopteran, Meganeura was practically minimalist. You grin at the thought, less is more, right? But evolution clearly wasn't on a budget here. 6 wings might sound excessive, like ordering triple espresso when a double would suffice. But the Paleodictyoptera seemed to thrive in their hexawinged extravagance. A soft rustle from nearby crops up your attention. You glance down to see a cluster of small roaches, descendants of those Section 8 cockroaches now cast in miniature form, skittering away as the Paleodictyoptera hovers overhead. Their tiny legs click against leaf litter, a percussive counterpoint to the insect's delicate wing beat. You can practically hear them chuckle among themselves. Look at that guy. 6 wings and still no chill. A gentle, sleepy chuckle escapes you too, because even you have to admit it's a little ridiculous. You shift your gaze back up just in time to see the Paleodictyoptera tilt its wings, banking toward a patch of starlit ferns. As it moves, you catch a whiff of something sweet and ancient, like rotting vanilla mixed with damp hay. It's hard to pinpoint the source. Maybe it's the resin from club moss bark, or perhaps the insect is exuding some pheromone that smells oddly like early candlelight. In any case, the aroma pulls you forward, drawing you closer to observe. Beneath the moonlight, you notice tiny bristles lining the insect's legs and underside. You recall a fringe tidbit from a whispered conversation with a paleoentomologist. Some researchers propose that these bristles acted like microsensors, detecting subtle air currents or even chemical traces in the mist. Imagine a bug that can taste the night air to locate food or mates, kind of like using Google Maps for bugs, except less accurate and more prone to crashing. Though the fossil record can't prove bristles were sensory organs, the idea persists among a handful of specialists who argue trichoid sensilla distribution patterns suggest enhanced aeroolfaction in Paleodictyoptera. In plain English, a few scientists believe these insects had tiny feelers that help them navigate and hunt in the dark, but we have no smoking gun evidence. Your own beard bristles twitch with the irony of it. You stand here, an awkwardly big human, getting schooled by a 6-winged insect that knows more about aerodynamics than your drone pilot buddy. You take a slow breath. The night air, still heavy with that oxygen rush from Section 3, filling your lungs like an overstuffed pillow. You feel a faint tingling at the base of your skull, as if the forest itself is sending you a gentle, sleepy reminder. Get on with it. This show's only halfway done. You step along a root slick with moss, and the insect hovers directly above, its wings beating in a slow, soothing rhythm. Your footsteps slow to match. You do this on purpose. Sync your breathing, pace, and sense of awe with the Paleodictyoptera's flight. The effect is hypnotic. You could doze standing up, rocked by the gentle wing beats and the soft drone rising from the ferny depths. A memory floats in from Section 6, the debate about insect respiratory systems. You wonder if Paleodictyoptera had muscle-assisted tracheal pumps like those fringed dragonflies, or if they simply relied on that ancient oxygen buffet. The scholarly debate drifts into your mind once more. The presence and functionality of prothoracic air sacs in Paleodictyoptera is unverified by extant physiological analogues. In other words, we don't know if they had special air chambers to help them breathe, because there's no modern animal to compare them to directly. Only fossils, and fossils can't tell us everything. As you follow it, you notice how the insect S wings catch faint moonbeams and split them into diamond-like chromatography, iridescent flashes of purple, green, and gold. It looks like a living kaleidoscope drifting through the night. You breathe that in, letting the soft colors lull you, while 3 or 4 tiny jokes bubble to the surface of your brain. If you tried to build this in Minecraft, you'd need at least 6 redstone-powered pistons, and it still wouldn't fly right. Somewhere, a modern ultralight aircraft designer is face-palming. How did insects figure this out 300 million years ago? And I'm still tinkering with duct tape. And if Paleodictyoptera could tweet, its profile picture would be a scrolling panorama of human drones crashing into trees. But you keep those thoughts tucked under a yawn, because indulgent pomposity doesn't help you clock any sleep points. With surreal grace, the insect lands on a broad frond of a tree fern. You kneel to get a closer look, careful not to disturb it. Its head tilts slightly, proboscis probing along the surface of the leaf, searching for microscopic droplets of sap or fungi spores. You remember from section 5 how Arthropleura munched through decaying matter. Maybe Paleodictyoptera had its own speakeasy, nibbling on fungal filaments or sipping from plant exudates. Some fringe research even posits that they might have specialized in tasting fungal mycelia directly rather than plant juices. Nobody's found stomach contents to prove it, so for now the debate stands. The dietary breadth of Paleodictyoptera, including mycophagy versus saprophagy, remains unresolved. Watching those violent debates in your mind, you consider how scientists use puns like mycophagy, fungus eating, and saprophagy, eating decaying matter, as though casually ordering brunch. In your world, though, you just hope it's not eyeing you as a snack. But you relax. This insect seems focused on its fungal feast, ignoring you entirely, much like how the cockroaches from section 8 ignored you once they realized you weren't an edible leaf. You lean closer, allowing the soft crunch of decaying leaf fibers under your fingertips to sync with the insect's delicate wing tremors. There's a gentle click in the underbrush. Arthropleura from section 5 wandered by, forging a deep percussion track like a bass drum under this delicate insect performance. Every now and then, a low thrum from section 2 resurfaces, a memory of Meganeura's wings beating above, a silent reminder that predators once patrolled these skies. A soft breeze ruffles the fronds overhead, and you notice a faint ripple in the Paleodictyoptera's wings as it senses the shift. For a moment, its 6 wings freeze in an almost meditative stillness, vaguely reminiscent of a hummingbird's hover, but then they resume their gentle pulsing. You exhale, and your breath mingles with mist and the faint scent of rot-tinged vanilla. Now you decide to move on, but not without a final visual indulgence. You watch the insect lift off, 6 wings parting the night, in a gust so soft you can hardly hear it. In that silent push, you notice the subtle way the wings overlap, like pages in a well-loved book. There's no chaos here, just coordinated, unhurried elegance. You realize that when the insect lifts into the moonlight, its shadow on the frond behind it ripples like a dream dissolving. You step back, leaving it to its midnight wanderings. As you do, you reflect on how this little hexa-winged marvel encapsulates so many threads of the Carboniferous tapestry. Everything converges in this one creature, time and again, reality and speculation dancing in an endless pas de deux. You cast one last glance up, where shadows of wings flit among the starlight. A quiet thrill creeps up your spine as you realize, tonight, you've not just observed a bug. You've shared a heartbeat with a creature that knows secrets your waking mind can to fully comprehend. Its 6 wings echo in your memory, a lullaby in itself. Less melody, more a gentle whisper in 6-part harmony that hums you towards sleep. You rise, careful not to crush the tiny world beneath your feet. The forest floor, still warm from a day of sunlight fermenting the ferns, holds the faint impressions of insect tracks, each one a story waiting to be told. You brush off a few specks of mud from your pants and let the murmur of the Carboniferous night settle around you like a soft duvet. The Paleodictyoptera's figure fades from view, but its presence lingers in every flutter of wings you hear in the distance, in every rustle of moss underfoot. And now, as you drift away from this dreamscape, the gentle thrum of 6 wings fades into nothingness, replaced by the soft susurrus of night insects and the whisper of ancient leaves. You close your eyes, letting sleep take over, carrying with you the memory of that delicate, hexa-winged creature, an elegy in insects, a reminder that even in a world ruled by monsters, beauty thrived in strange, unexpected forms. You sigh, and the forest exhales with you. You slip through a thinning of club mosses and ferns, the forest floor beneath your feet turning from spongy peat to a smoother, rockier ground. It feels almost unnatural, like walking from plush carpet onto cold tile. Ahead, the underbrush parts, revealing a low, flat outcrop of shale, dark, fissile and speckled with faint glimmers of mica. You crouch, tracing a fingertip along the slick surface, and for a moment, the world falls away. This is the kind of slab where time presses itself into stone, whispering secrets of wings and legs that fluttered hundreds of millions of years ago. You gently brush away a layer of moist moss, revealing a delicate pattern etched into the shale. A nearly perfect wing impression, veins fanning out like the wrought iron windows of a cathedral. You remember Meganura from Section 2, its majestic wings cutting through golden green light above the ferns. Yet here is its humble cousin, fossilized in flat black rock, preserved like a postcard from deep time. A mainstream historical fact settles into your mind. Insect fossils from the Carboniferous are often found in fine-grained shales and cherts because these deposits formed in calm, low-oxygen environments where decay slowed and delicate structures could be captured in exquisite detail. This rock, cold, hard and still, holds the shape of that long-vanished creature's wings, veins, and even the faint ridges of muscle attachment. A subtle thrill runs through you as you press your palm to the stone, feeling its coolness anchor you. You're not just touching rock, you're connecting with a world lost to oxygen ebbs, evolving forests, and the triumphs of six-legged titans. You imagine the insect drifting through marshy twilight, its wings brushing against smoky fan-like horsetails, hunting prey or escaping predators. Now, it lies still, an echo in shale. Nearby, a jagged piece of stone catches your eye. You flip it over, and there, preserved in relief, is the imprint of a small Eurypterid's telson, the paddle-shaped tail flick frozen in stony slumber. It's no Megalograptus behemoth, but you can see the segmented outline, each joint rendered crystal clear by fine sediment that once settled gently around the creature's body. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Sometimes, Eurypterid fossils are found curled in what looks like burrow casts, as if the creature was captured mid-dig into muddy banks. Some scholars speculate they might have burrowed to escape predators or extreme environmental conditions, leaving behind fossilized resting traces that puzzle paleontologists to this day. Your fingers linger over the Eurypterid imprint, and a breeze stirs overhead. It carries the faint tang of decaying matter, a reminder of past sections where rotting ferns and mushrooms fed giant millipedes in Section 4 and Section 5. You close your eyes for a second, picturing those swampy waters where Eurypterids cruised, hunting fish and smaller arthropods. Then you stand and survey the outcrop more broadly. Here, the shale layers ripple like pages in a time book. Each thin stratum marks a moment when sediment settled on a still pool, sealing in life's fragile forms. You see traces of beetle elytra, perfectly oval, their curved edges glinting just slightly against the dark background. You recall from Section 6 how beetles contributed to nutrient cycles, shredding plant material into bits. Now, their fleeting existence is carved into stone. You reach for a small hammer, piece of driftwood shaped by your journey, and tap gently on the slab. With a soft click, a fragment flakes away, revealing more detail. A pair of jointed legs, each segment tapering into a tiny claw. You're holding the echo of a creature that once scuttled beneath ferns, breathing supercharged carboniferous air. The preservation is so precise, you swear you can almost see the microhairs that bristled along those legs, detecting air currents as the insect moved. As you cradle the fragment, a scholarly debate drifts through your mind, an open-ended riddle echoing the fissures in this shale. Taphonomic processes controlling the fidelity of soft tissue preservation in carboniferous insect assemblages remain contentious. In plain language, scientists argue about exactly which conditions, water chemistry, sedimentation rates, microbial activity, allowed these delicate features to survive at all. A wrong shift in pH, a burst of oxygen, or a sudden storm could have erased these stories forever. Yet here they are, stubbornly surviving to tell a tale. You pocket the fragment and stand again, brushing off flecks of shale from your hands. The outcrop stretches laterally, a gentle incline revealing veins of coalized plant matter and occasional fern fronds pressed flat. One such leaf trails across the rock face, its thin ribs splaying out like a fan. You kneel to examine it more closely. A mainstream fact emerges. Many carboniferous plant fossils are found alongside insect fossils because fallen fronds and fern mats often created low-oxygen microenvironments ideal for preservation. As plants died and fell, they settled into waterlogged basins, protecting trapped insects from scavengers and decay, creating a snapshot of life. A rotting fern frond beside a snapping pincers fossil. Your gaze flicks to a faint curve in the rock. Small, too small to be a fern. Leaning in, you recognize the wispy outline of a tiny centipede, or perhaps a juvenile Arthroplura. Its multiple leg segments are less distinct, but the body rings are discernible. You recall from section 4 how the largest Arthroplura could reach sofa length, but this one must have been juveniles, feeding on detritus between mossy logs. Now it's a ghost in shale, a reminder that even the mightiest lineages began small, vulnerable. A thought surfaces. Sometimes amber traps insects with incredible three-dimensional fidelity. But such resin-based preservation doesn't exist until much later in Earth's timeline. You remember laughing at that in section 11. Insects in amber? Not yet, my friend. Yet here, in these flat layers of shale, the story is more subtle. No trapped insects suspended in glassy resin, but rather impressed outlines where bodies rotted away, leaving hushed whispers of exoskeletons for sediment to record. You run your palm across the fragment again, feeling the shallow grooves that mapped an insect's life. A fringe theory drifts in from some obscure conference poster you once saw. Certain shale beds might preserve coloration patterns on wings, faint traces of pigmented bands that modern analytical techniques could one day decode. Imagine reconstructing not just shape, but true color on a 300-million-year-old insect. The idea sits on the edge of scientific plausibility. Analysis of original pigment residues in carboniferous insect cuticle remains highly speculative, but it makes you smile at the possibilities. As afternoon light filters through the canopy, you allow yourself to relax against the outcrop. The air here feels cooler, weighted by the knowledge that these rocks hold more stories than any living creature could ever narrate. Rising to your knees, you glance at the edge of the shale bed, where sediment gives way to a shallow stream. Water trickles over smooth stones, carrying tiny flakes of shale downstream like confetti from a primeval celebration. You consider how paleontologists assemble these fragments into coherent narratives. Each shale piece is a puzzle shard. Leg segments go here, wing veins fit there. Museums sometimes display reconstructed skeletons in glass cases, but insects are seldom reassembled that way. Instead, they're celebrated in 2 dimensions. Delicate line drawings or photographs highlighting every vein and ridge, each a clue to physiology, behavior, and environment. A small cluster of fossilized insect trackways glints near the water's edge. Multiple parallel grooves where an arthropod once wandered across soft mud, leaving footprints that hardened under mineral-rich water. You kneel, tracing the tracks with your fingertip, feeling faint ridges where the insect's legs tracked through sediment. It's another mainstream fact. Trackways, ichnofossils, offer direct evidence of behavior, not just morphology. You can see how fast an insect moved, how it turned, even if its body never fossilized alongside. Each line is a breadcrumb on an ancient breadcrumb trail. Nearby, you spot a fossilized burrow cast, a tube-like hollow infilled with sand, the outline of a creature that tunneled beneath the surface. You recall the whispered chorus of burrowing eurypterids in section 7, and a hush blankets you as you realize this cast might represent that behavior. It's subtle evidence, one step removed from a body fossil, yet powerful. It captures an action, a skill, a moment of life's ingenuity under the weight of water and sediment. A scholarly debate phrase surfaces. Paleoichnological interpretations of arthropod burrowing behaviors in late Paleozoic strata remain under debate due to limited stratigraphic continuity. Translation: we have a few mysterious burrow fossils and trackways, but without continuous layers to compare, it's hard to know which species made them or why. The fragmentary nature of the record means you're left filling gaps with careful speculation, referencing modern analogues like horseshoe crabs' beach burrows or termite tunnels in tropical forests. You let out a soft laugh, part wonder, part wonderment, at your own human tendency to chase mysteries across eons. From Section 1's introduction through Section 9's nocturnal concert, you've met dragonflies, millipedes, scorpions, and six-winged oddities. Now, you stand among their silent memorials in shale. Each fossil is a line in the Earth's audiobook, waiting for someone to read it. A sudden rustle behind you draws your gaze. A small cockroach, one of those ubiquitous detritivores you met in Section 8, scuttles across a broken shale piece, its antennae flicking like divining rods. It pauses, almost inspecting your shadow, then darts away. You can't help but grin. From towering giants to tiny survivors, the cast of characters in this Stone Age drama feels more alive here, represented by their stony imprints, than in any live jungle today. You slide a larger slab back into place, revealing more hidden wings and leg fragments. Time and again, you're struck by their precision, veins mere millimeters apart, delicate joints that once flexed powerfully, now frozen in eternity. Life and death blur in these outcrops. You close your eyes, imagining a world where sediment fell like gentle snowfall, burying insects alive, preserving them for unimaginable futures. It's unnerving and beautiful. As you rise to leave the shale bed, your mind lingers on one final scholarly debate. The provenance and paleo-environmental context of mixed insect-plant Lagerstätten during the Carboniferous remain undercharacterized. In simpler terms, we still don't fully grasp why some fossil sites are treasure troves, preserving multiple species together, while others yield only fragments. Was it sudden flooding, quiet, stagnant ponds, a catastrophic methane burst? The questions swirl, unanswered, yet there's comfort in the uncertainty. The shale doesn't judge you for not knowing. It merely sits, an unblinking eye in a forest of ferns, waiting for the next curious finger to trace its ancient lines. You turn and walk away, leaving the rock to its silent vigil. Behind you, the faint, ghostly shapes of wings and claws remain, waiting to whisper their stories to anyone willing to listen. In the distance, ferns sway, creating rippling shadows across the shale's surface. A solitary mayfly lands on a small outcrop, its glassy wings, decades younger than the fossil beneath it, mirroring shapes that haven't changed much in hundreds of millions of years. You breathe in, feeling the cool forest air fill your lungs, and realize that each insect you've met is not just a memory, but a thread woven into this vast tapestry of life. The shale outcrop, though static, sings with echoes of wings, clicks, and ripples, all the voices of creatures who once danced through swamps, hunted in pools, and flicked needles of legs across ferns. As you step away, you leave behind footprints in soft moss, a fleeting imprint soon swallowed by time, much like the fossils you just studied. The forest accepts your departure with a gentle hush, letting you carry the fragments of its ancient stories in your mind, like talismans against the silence of tomorrow. You step out of the shale outcrop's hush, and back into the damp hum of the forest, the air thick with memory and moss. Your boots squelch through soft mud as you follow a winding path lined with ancient ferns, arcing fronds that whisper secrets from Section 10's fossil trove. Tonight, though, you're shifting focus, looking for the resinous ghosts of a practice that hasn't occurred here yet. Insects in amber? Not yet, my friend, you remind yourself, because true amber entombment doesn't show up until tens of millions of years in the future. but you're here to scout the signs, to sense the world on the brink of discovering sticky fossil time capsules. You pause at the base of a great lycopod tree, its trunk thick as a cottage and bark segmented like stacked plates. The bark is pocked and scaly, tinted emerald with lichen and shadowed by dangling vines of moss. Resin isn't flowing yet. There are no amber blisters on these trunks, but you can almost feel the tension beneath the surface. Resin is, after all, a plant's defense, a sticky barrier against insects, fungi, and disease. In this carboniferous forest, conifers haven't evolved their resinous armor. Instead, these lycopods and sigillarias rely on thick bark and water-laden tissues to fend off pests. An open, scholarly debate phrase drifts into your mind. The evolution of resin exudation as a defensive strategy in gymnosperms remains poorly constrained by the pre-Mesozoic fossil record. In other words, scientists still argue about when exactly trees first started oozing resin because the evidence is so scant before true amber sites emerge. You kneel and brush away a tangle of moss at the trunk's base, exposing the rough texture of bark and the faint imprint of leaf scars. You imagine seashell swirls morphing into resin pockets a few million years from now, pools of sap bubbling up, eventually hardening into the golden or honey-coloured glass we now prize above fireplaces. But this forest, right now, offers no such luxury. The idea of amber here is purely speculative, a dream whispered by future paleobotanists. Yet, you can't help but sense that something smouldering lies just outside your grasp, a promise forthcoming. Wading through a clutch of club mosses, you spot a V-shaped notch in a dead branch arching overhead. It's a spot where resin might eventually seep from a sapwood wound, turning sticky and catching unsuspecting insects. You imagine a little gnat, its wings shimmering with Devo-like energy, buzzing too close to this future amber site. Its wingbeats stutter frozen, limbs forever preserved in translucent gold. As you crouch beneath that notch, you recall a mainstream historical fact. Amber as a fossilizing agent doesn't appear until the late Carboniferous to early Permian, with primitive flyers like conifer relatives developing resin canals. However, truly abundant insect-entombing amber only flourishes in the Cretaceous, roughly 100 million years after the time you now occupy. You trace a fingertip along the edge of the scar, feeling tiny fissures where resin could one day seep. For now, there's nothing but rough grain and the memory of wind whispering through the fronds. You can almost hear the debate echoing among distant researchers. Gymnosperm exudation timing, relative to insect herbivory pressures, remains equivocal. Translation: scientists aren't sure whether trees began making resin because insects started chewing on them, or if resin evolved for some other reason and only incidentally preserved insects much later. In this Polaroid moment of pre-amber existence, you're standing at an evolutionary watershed, though you don't yet realize the full magnitude. You rise and let your gaze wander up the trunk, past glistening spores drifting like miniature lanterns. Your path curves toward a marshy hollow where ancient horsetails, whiskery and hollow, form a cathedral of green. Here, fallen logs lie half submerged in water, dark as coffee, their surfaces dotted with mushrooms and crusted with algae. You recall from Section 4 how Arthropleura grazed on decaying matter, and from Section 5 how Eurypterids hunted in murky shallows. There's a synergy here, wood decaying and those scavengers pressing nutrients back into the soil. In the future, as real resin flows, many of those decaying logs will develop pockets of sticky sap, especially when injured or under stress. But tonight, they remain inert husks. Among the standing horsetails, you spy a slender, coiling vine, an ancestral club moss running rampant, winding around a stump. Its bark seems thin, almost papery, scribed with fine vertical striations. You imagine a minor injury, a branch snapping or a slug-like amphibian's teeth tearing into it, would produce a thin smear of resin just beneath the surface. That resin might ooze, catching moisture and encapsulating a tiny insect leg or spore. Yet here, now, moisture prevents resin from congealing. The waterlogged tissues simply ooze muddy sap that dissolves back into the spongy soil. The transformation from sap to resin to amber won't come for another geological heartbeat. Your thoughts drift to a quirky tidbit. In much later amber deposits, some dating to the Cretaceous, scientists have found fossilized feathers, microbial communities, even droplets of ancient water trapped alongside insects. But here, in this carboniferous hollow, those possibilities are science fiction. You can't imagine a mosquito wing suspended in gold when water and decay reign unchallenged. Yet, the foundations for eventual amber may already exist in the plant chemistry, in defense responses that haven't fully matured. Stepping carefully, you make your way to a patch of wet ground spotted with tiny pools. Each pool is ringed with charcoal-stained earth, a bleak reminder of past forest fires, scenes from Section 3, where oxygen-rich air fueled conflagrations that charred entire forests. You recall that frequent fires might have pressured some plant lineages to develop sticky, antiseptic resins to heal wounds quickly. Fires, as you know, renewed soil fertility, but also thinned out competitors, opening niches for plants that could resist or recover from burns. Those selective pressures, some paleobotanists argue, set the stage for resin canals that millions of years later would give us amber. The open scholarly debate phrase echoes. The role of paleo-wildfires in directing resin canal evolution in arborescent lycopsids and early pteridosperms is unresolved. In other words, did frequent carbon-choked fires push trees to evolve resin? We're not certain. The marsh hush deepens as evening mist drifts across your path. You kneel by one of those pools, cupping a handful of water and letting it slip through your fingers like time running backward. You see tiny aquatic insects flit beneath the surface, primitive gnats and mayfly nymphs, unaware of their potential as amber exhibits in a far-off future. You watch a mayfly nymph dart away, shedding its exoskeleton in a molting display reminiscent of Section 6's evolutionary shifts. That exoskeleton transformation leaves behind chitinous husks that might one day fossilize in stone, but not in resin. Tonight, these insects belong in mud and shale, not suspended in golden time. You rise again, hands dripping, and press on toward a clearing where the ground rises slightly. An ancient mounded mound of peat and compressed plant material, the precursor to coal seams. A faint hiss of breath escapes your lips as you remember Section 9, where Paleodictyoptera's wings sliced through moonlight. Now, that same clearing is silent, save for insects skirting through the ferns and the distant plink of amphibians in a shallow pond. You bend over a fallen branch whose bits of bark peel back like curled pages. You pry it gently, searching for any resinous streak, golden veins that could hint at future amber. But you find only damp wood, dark and cold. The world around you feels pregnant with possibility, an unbroken line stretching from fronds to resin to amber to fossilized wonder. A breeze stirs the fronds overhead, and a cascade of spores drifts earthward like drifting feathers. Their soft landing sends a gentle rustle, a reminder of life's relentless drive to persist. You swallow, reminding yourself, here, amber formation is pure speculation. Only the promise burns in your mind. A faint light catches your eye. Down the path, you notice a rotting stump scored by insect mandibles. Tiny grooves where ancient cockroaches from Section 8 chewed their way in. One jagged incision runs just deep enough to expose a clear resin-like sap. Slightly more viscous than surrounding fluids, but still fluid enough to seep back into wood. It's not resin yet, just a sugary beckoning of future evolution. You run your fingertip along that sticky smear and taste the faint sweetness. In a few million years, if this tree were a conifer or a pteridosperm, that kind of sap might harden into resin when exposed to microbes and air. But tonight, it dissolves back into the vine-entangled rot, its promise unfulfilled. A single drab bug, one of the roaches, scuttles across the stump, antennae flicking. It pauses as if sniffing the air, then scuttles on, unconcerned by your scientific musings. It has no idea it's flirting with the kind of death that could, in a future era, make it famous. You grin despite yourself. Enjoy your anonymity, friend. Your moment of fame is at least 100 million years away. As darkness settles deeper, a chorus of insect wings begins to rise. The nocturnal hum you know well by now. Dragonflies and their kin return to patrol even this shadowed realm. While near the marsh, you catch the faint flick of a eurypterid tail from Section 7, propelling it deeper into the hollow. Night in the Carboniferous is a living canvas, where faint lights and sounds betray only hints of the dramatic transformations to come. Resin, amber, and their insect captives remain yet unborn. You take a final pause at the center of the clearing, inhaling the damp, earthy perfume of decaying plants, crushed fronds, and faint ozone from the distant sky overhead. It's a smell you'll recognize in some far-flung amber museum someday, bottled as petrichor or forest floor. For now, though, it's just the breath of a forest that doesn't yet know it can fossilize life in honeyed resin. One last thought rises. In a far future amber deposit, people will marvel at a gnat suspended in perfection, 99% intact, wings unfurled, legs poised. But here, tonight, that gnat flits free, unencumbered by golden glass. It bobs through the air, alive, unscripted, unseen by the future. You rise on unsteady legs, letting the mist swirl around your ankles. Your mind, heavy with sleep's approach, lingers on the pathways of resin evolution, on the scholarly debates you can't settle tonight. But you know one thing for certain. The Carboniferous forest, so adamant in its non-amber state, holds within its chemical codes the seeds of future preservation. It's a reminder that sometimes, the greatest stories are those that haven't fully written themselves yet. You turn, retracing your steps across moss and mud, leaving behind the bark-splashed stump, the rotting logs, the silent hollow. The forest exhales behind you, soft breezes ruffling club moss fronds, insect wings stirring like hushed applause. You can almost hear the distant hum of future scientists unraveling resin secrets, whispering, "Insects in amber." Not yet, my friend, but soon. You push through a curtain of hanging sporangia, those fuzzy sacs of spores you first noticed in Section 11, stepping into a sun-dappled glade where the ferns tower above like sentinels. In this bright, humid chamber, life unfolds in high drama. Predators stalk, prey scatter, and every flicker of movement can set your pulse racing. Here, the Carboniferous food web pulses like a tense orchestral finale, everything playing its part in a symphony of survival. Ahead, you spot a nimble amphibian, likely an early temnospondyle, perched on a smooth rock that glints with sweat from the morning's humidity. Its skin, mottled olive and charcoal, seems to shimmer under the half-light, reminding you of the small amphibian from Section 5 that sniffed you like an unblinking citizen of this swamp. It remains motionless, tongue flicking out to taste the air, nostrils flaring like tiny cuirassed armor. This creature is a mainstream historical fact. By the late Carboniferous, amphibians diversified into dozens of forms, some the size of modern crocodiles, though most were modestly sized, agile hunters of insects and smaller vertebrates. Many had sophisticated lateral line systems, sensory organs that detected water vibrations, which helped them hunt in these murky shallows. You circle downwind, careful to keep your steps silent through the springy humus. Your senses heighten. A rustle in the leaf litter there, the soft hum of insect wings overhead, and the low thrum of a beast approaching. The amphibian's head snaps towards a distant sound, a whoosh of wings, and you freeze, heart fluttering. It's a Meganeuropsis, a giant griffin fly nearly 75 centimeters across, cruising the glade like a stealth bomber. Its wing beat is so slow and graceful you almost feel lulled, but you remind yourself, this is predator territory. These giants don't hesitate when spotting a snack. A fringe tidbit drifts into your mind. Some unverified reports from paleontologists suggest that certain large predatory insects might have used visual flashes to startle prey, possibly reflecting sunlit patches on their wings to mimic flashes of light. No direct fossil evidence confirms it. Just an old remark in a footnote, about faint iridescence patterns on wing fossils. The idea feels half myth, half possible, but it makes you imagine a griffinfly pausing mid-air to dazzle a would-be meal before striking. A scholar might phrase the uncertainty as, the potential for iridescent flash displays in Meganeuropsis remains inconclusive due to preservation bias. In plain sleep-inducing terms, we can't say for sure if these giant flyers had built-in strobe lights. You shift your weight and catch another rustle, smaller, closer. Peering through tangled ferns, you see a flicker of multi-jointed legs retreating under a rotting log. A beetle, but not your usual humble detritivore. This one's coloured in a mottled pattern of obsidian and rust, almost exactly the size of your palm. It stops, antennae quivering, listening for vibrations. You recall from Section 6 how beetles acted as ecosystem custodians, munching through decaying matter and controlling fungal growth. Yet here, this particular beetle pauses, sensing the shift in the glade's tension. It's not a predator's target so much as an unwitting pawn. Food for the amphibians and insects prowling above. You step closer, trying not to disturb the beetle's sensing hairs. You almost brush its elytra, its hardened forewings, when a sudden commotion erupts. A line of cockroaches, the descendants of those you saw in Section 8, scuttle across a fallen frond, their legs clicking like a chorus of miniature castanets. A loud crack echoes through the clearing as a large fulcate horsetail snaps underfoot, perhaps a millipede's march, or your own intrusion. The amphibian twitches, its body coiling like a spring. You watch, breath held, as it lunges. The target, a sap-sucking insect, maybe a primitive cicada or a small drone wasp ancestor, buzzing lazily between fern fronds. The amphibian's jaws snap with startling speed, catching the insect in mid-flight. The bug's wings, veined and iridescent, flutter once, twice, and then still. A reminder that in this world, everyone is both predator and prey. Even an insect with stellar flight skill can't outrun a hungry amphibian's reflexes. Your chest tightens as you absorb the scene. In this glade, survival hinges on split-second judgments. Freeze or flee, strike or vanish. A mainstream historical fact anchors you. Insect-eating amphibians of the Carboniferous often possessed long, sticky tongues and psychotic fast reflexes, helping them capture swift prey in murky waters or dense undergrowth. Their eyes, perched high on their skulls, allowed them to see above water level and gauge insect traffic with uncanny precision. Yet this is also insect turf, an aerial realm where predators swoop from above. You crane your neck to spot the Meganeuropsis again. It hovers near a high frond, wings beating so languidly that they seem suspended in air. In that moment, you remember a quirky note you read. Some researchers propose that these giant griffinflies may have been sit-and-wait predators, clinging to elevated perches, like ancient bughawks, trying to conserve energy rather than constantly patrolling. They'd perch for hours, scanning the glade until an unwary insect wandered into range. To illustrate the uncertainty, a scholar might write, foraging strategies in Meganeuropsis, including ambush predation versus aerial pursuit, remain undetermined. You imagine the shading of debate filling textbooks, footnotes piled like layers of shale. The amphibian gives up on small insects and lunges instead at something larger. From under a mossy log emerges a juvenile roach the size of a grapefruit, legs pumping. It darts across the glade with surprising speed, forcing the amphibian to twist mid-leap. The frog-like creature lands sideways, snapping upright, only to miss as the juvenile roach disappears into a patch of club moss. You exhale, relief washing over you like a cool stream. Nearby, a pack of small millipedes, novel relatives of Arthropleura, slither out from under decaying bark, dozens of legs tacking across the damp soil. They cluster beneath a fern's overhang, serried ranks of armored segments acting like a living barricade. One brave or perhaps foolish millipede inches forward, antennae probing. The amphibian shifts its gaze, considering a different snack. But the millipedes, though slow, are more than mere ground cover. Some fringe theories suggest certain millipede species produced mild toxins in their body fluids, alkaloid-like compounds that deterred hungry predators. Evidence is scant, a few geochemical anomalies in fossil specimens hinting at toxin residues. Researchers hedge with phrases like, chemical defense mechanisms in late Paleozoic myriapods require further geochemical validation. You picture amphibians recoiling from a millipede's toxic secretion, leaving behind a bitter lesson etched in spore-laden breath. You pivot away, footsteps careful as you venture deeper into the glade. Overhead, the Meganeuropsis takes flight in a sudden swoop, diving toward a cluster of roaches feeding on decaying leaves. The roaches scatter like confetti in the wind, their exoskeletons reflecting flecks of gold as they dive for cover. The griffin flies more parts, and before you can fully register it, the insect vanishes into the surrounding ferns. Silence follows, and the glade seems to exhale in relief. Your pulse echoes in your ears as you watch the aftermath. Roach exoskeletons strewn across the leaf litter like tiny armor plates, a lone mayfly trembling on a rock, and the amphibian settling back into a semi-submerged pool, waiting for its next opportunity. This world is brutal, but it's also strangely rhythmic, predation and panic weaving themselves into the ecosystem's heartbeat. You catch a flicker of movement among twisted vines. A small, spider-like arachnid, possibly an early trigonotarbid, emerges to stake its claim in the predator hierarchy. It perches on a low branch, legs splayed like a star, waiting for smaller insects to wander into its sticky embrace. You recall a mainstream fact. Trigonotarbids were among the earliest land arachnids, possessing book lungs, primitive respiratory organs that allowed gas exchange. These creatures were adept ambush predators, sometimes found preserved clutching insect prey in fossilized death poses. Their presence here adds another predatory layer, a cascade where amphibians, giant insects, roaches, and arachnids all compete in a complex mesh of roles, a frightful rustle behind you. This time it's not a predator, but a frightened prey. A group of small springtails erupts from the leaf litter, catapulting into the air on their specialized furcula and scattering. They land with muted thuds on moss-covered logs and glistening bark, barely registering as a flutter in the greater cacophony. These tiny, six-legged survivors are the ultimate opportunists, too small to interest predators like griffin flaxes and too quick for amphibian tongues. You remember from Section 6 how springtails play critical roles in soil formation and nutrient cycling, breaking down fungal hyphae and decaying plant matter. Their frenetic leaps are so lightning fast that predators often miss them entirely. Except maybe a trigonotarbid's keen chelicerae might snap up the occasional unlucky springtail. You smile at their resilience, imagining anthropomorphic mini-catapults, springing them into cinematic escape arcs. Nearby, a whisper echoes through the ferns. A scholarly debate phrase emerges unbidden. Latitudinal distribution and habitat specificity of Carboniferous Malaise assemblages remain poorly resolved. In simpler, sleep-luring terms, we still don't know exactly where and how certain predator-prey networks operated across different regions of the planet. You're feeling drowsier by the second, lulled by the endless cascade of life and death vignettes. Each moment of tension subsides into calm, only to spike again the instant a predator strikes or prey flees. You lean against a sturdy horsetail stem, savoring the humid scent of fern spores and moist decaying wood. A tiny cricket-like insect steps onto the stem, insect antennae brushing across your boot. It chirps once, a delicate, rapid trill that might be interpreted as either a mating call or a territorial warning. Scientists still debate whether these early orthopterans use sound chiefly to attract mates or to ward off competitors. Acoustic signaling evolution in Paleozoic Orthoptera remains ambiguous. In your half-awake state, you file that away as more golden lullaby material. And then you sense it. A shift in the glade's energy, a subtle change in wind direction. Something darker, heavier, and more deliberate moves beneath the leaf litter. You glance down to see flickers of segmented legs, the approach of a juvenile Arthropleura, maybe 3 feet long. its many legs rippling like a living carpet. It's smaller than its colossal ancestors, but still massive compared to everything else scuttling here. It moves with surprising silence, body low, as though testing the ground for vibrations. Your heart hammers as you realize the juvenile millipede is both predator and competitor. Some studies suggest certain smaller arthroplurids may have been carnivorous, or at least omnivorous, tackling smaller insects and possibly even scavenging amphibian remains. There's a fringe notion. Dietary plasticity in juvenile arthroplura implies facultative predation, a phrase hinting that these creatures might have adapted their diets based on opportunity, switching from detritus to freshly captured prey when hungry. You imagine a juvenile arthroplura seizing a roach or even a baby amphibian in its many-legged grasp, nightmarish and awe-inspiring. Before it can notice you, you hold perfectly still, matching your breathing to its gentle pulse. The juvenile glides past, nostrils flaring, antennae poised, seeking food under decaying logs. It never spots you. As it fades into a darker tangle of ferns, a sigh escapes you. You've witnessed predator and prey in a single heartbeat. Amphibians striking at roaches, griffinflaxes diving on unsuspecting targets, spiders ready to snatch drifting insects, and juvenile arthroplura scouring for decomposing matter or live scoops of protein. The glade's tension lifts and settles into a quiet acceptance. Life continues, cycles persist. You exhale and lean back against the horsetail, feeling the gentle quiver of its stem under your weight. Above, silence blooms for a moment, then returns to the soft hum of wing beats and the distant drip of condensation. You inhale deeply, the humid air filling your lungs like a soothing balm. In this swirling tapestry of predation, each life and death scenario has played out precisely as evolution intended, from ambush to escape, from lethal strike to unharmed survival. You feel yourself drifting towards sleep, lulled by the echoing clicks, buzzes and thumps. Insects and amphibians, spiders and arthropods, they're all playing out their roles in a forest that pulses with purpose. You let your eyes close, picturing the ferns swaying around you, the glade bathed in a soft, slanted light. Predator and prey fade into soft focus, and the forest's heartbeat, rhythmic, unending, carries you into the next realm of dreams. You drift across the undulating landscape of Pangaea's predecessor, a patchwork of shallow seas, coal swamps, and nascent mountain ranges, carried on nothing more than the dreamlike persistence of your own thoughts. As you float, you notice patterns. Giant insects thrive in some areas, yet vanish completely from others. It's almost like a cosmic joke. These colossal bugs, dragonflies bigger than hawks, millipedes longer than your couch, exist here in abundance, while just a few hundred miles away, there's not a whiff of their presence. You stretch out, letting the humid air brush past your face like warm silk, and you begin to map the world's hotspots of insect gigantism and the curious voids they never filled. First, you drift over what we now call Europe. Vast equatorial wetlands stretch beneath you, a twin ribbon of swamps that would one day leave behind coal seams. Here, the memories of Meganeura from Section 2 still linger. Fossils of meter-wide dragonflies ripple through the fine-grained shale of the Westphalian coal measures. You hover just above a pond rimmed with horsetails and lycopods, remembering how, in Section 7, sea scorpions patrolled similar waters. The water here glimmers with the reflections of ferns, and you can almost hear the lance of Meganeuridae wings cutting through the mist. It's not an illusion. Late Carboniferous Europe was indeed a wonderland for giant flyers. The mainstream fact is clear. Abundant coal deposits in Europe yield some of the most spectacular fossil records of mega insects, confirming they were abundant across this lush, equatorial landscape. Gliding west, you cross into what is now North America, Laurentia at the time, with vast coastal deltas feeding into a shallow Epiric Sea. Gigantic insects bob around in these deltaic wetlands, and you recall Section 3's lesson on oxygen. This region's combination of abundant plant growth and stagnant water helped trap organic mass, boosting oxygen levels locally. Here too, Arthropleura tracks crisscross the floodplains. Each set of footprints, a slow-motion drumbeat from a creature 9 feet long. You watch a juvenile Arthropleura, even in a smaller form, it's still as long as a large dog, undulating through fern thickets. A quirky tad of trivia surfaces. Some trackways in Nova Scotia show Arthropleura straddling narrow channels of water, as if it knew exactly how to navigate shallow pools without getting stuck. Those fossils whisper of a creature both huge and surprisingly dexterous. Turning southward, the landscape shifts. You pass over what is now Western Africa, part of Gondwana's northern edge, but nestled closer to the equator back then. Here too, coal swamps flourish, but the record of giant insects is patchier. You dip low over Nigeria's Mosquito Hills region, yes, ridiculously named even then, where shale layers reveal smaller insect species, but no massive winged titans. It's as if the ancestral mega insects gave this region a hard pass. You tilt your head, trying to understand why. Some researchers blame preservation bias, fewer sedimentary basins conducive to fossilization, so maybe giant insects were there but didn't get preserved. Others suggest climatic factors. Maybe this part of Gondwana experienced slightly different pH levels in the swamp waters, so oxygen wasn't quite as supersaturated, subtly capping insect growth. The whisper of a scholarly debate drifts through. The paleobiogeographical distribution of carboniferous giant insects is still contested due to uneven sampling and regional paleoenvironmental variation. Further east, you skim over what is now eastern China, then part of Cathasia, its own mini-continent separated by shallow seas. Here, lush rainforests drape across lowlands, but the fossils tell a more modest tale. A handful of larger-than-modern insects, yes, but none approaching Meganeura proportions. Instead, you find robust but mid-sized dragonflies, sturdy roaches, and a few delicate six-winged Paleodictyoptera from Section 9. Some scientists point to crypto-correlations between paleolatitude and oxygen thresholds. Perhaps Cathasia's ultra-humid microclimate promoted fungal growth that consumed oxygen locally, dragging atmospheric O2 down just enough to limit insect titans. It's a fringe idea, but you feel a tingle imagining fungal hyphae outcompeting spore-producing plants for oxygen. Local paleo-ecophysiological constraints on insect gigantism remain under exploration. You murmur in your second-person reverie, recasting the scholarly caveat for gentle ASMR consumption. You dip southward, approaching exotic terrains that will eventually become Australia and Antarctica. Here lies a bewildering absence. Although some coal seams hint at wetland habits, giant insect fossils remain practically unheard of. You cross what will be Central Australia, an ancient inland sea back then, and notice the landscape is drier and more seasonal, with fewer sprawling swamps. For an instant, you imagine a lonely Meganeura-sized dragonfly trying to find dinner here, failing because there simply aren't enough insect morsels to justify such a size. Some textbooks suggest that vast interior continental positions led to harsher seasonality, dry spells where giant aquatic or amphibious larvae couldn't survive. The open scholarly debate phrase surfaces again. Climatic seasonality in early Gondwanan interiors may have restricted arthropod gigantism. In plainer asleep text, scientists are still uncrossing T's on whether dryness throttled insect growth. Here, the itch of absence is as telling as a fossil's shape. Sometimes what isn't there speaks louder than what is. Moving west, you cross the southern tip of Gondwana, modern-day Antarctica, where paleomagnetic data suggest polar ice caps had begun to grow even in the late Carboniferous. The silence here is absolute. No Arthropleura trackways, no wings in shale, not even a roach. It's mid-afternoon down here in your mind's eye, but the sun hovers low on the horizon, filtered through swirling mists and drifting ice flows. It's a frozen wasteland compared to the balmy, oxygen-rich equator. A mainstream historical fact reminds you, the Karoo Ice Age gripped Gondwana during parts of the Carboniferous, suppressing swamp formation, and dramatically reducing habitable wetland ecosystems. No swamps, no vast oxygen producers, no giant bugs. You shiver in the narrative draft, feeling an echo of how cold and barren this place must have seemed to any adventurous insect. Now you ascend northward over the central Pangaean Mountains, a rising chain that splits shallow seas into isolated basins. On the eastern flank, what will become eastern North America, you find fewer coal-forming wetlands and fewer records of mega-arthropods. This is territory where smaller insects outcompeted larger ones, darting in and out of scrubby lowlands. You recall Section 6's musings on oxygen decline. Local mountain weather patterns may have funneled cooler, moister air upward, reducing ambient O2 at the elevations where these insects might have roamed. Monotrack mountain passes, you muse, imagining a fossil-hunting arthropod glancing around and muttering, "No thanks, I'll take the lowland buffet." A rhetorical smile warms your voice as the scholarly caveat arises. Elevation-driven oxygen gradients and their impact on insect body sizes during the Carboniferous are not fully resolved. Crossing the Tethys Sea, you come to what will be modern-day India, but back then had only just broken from Gondwana, drifting northward. The fossil evidence is fragmentary, shards of wings, a few cockroach impressions, one lonely eurypterid carapace. Nothing as grand as Meganeura or Arthropleura. Perhaps these lands were transitional zones, too exposed to salt spray or too tectonically unstable for stable swamp complexes. You hover low, listening to the faint hiss of tidal currents in your imagination. You wonder if a giant insect ever dared skim the surface here, only to find its wings salt-crusted and useless. The fringe theory echoes. Salinity gradients in nearshore basins may have limited Lophotrichozoan and arthropod occupancy, meaning high salt levels might have discouraged giant arthropods. It sounds improbably technical for bedtime, but it soothes you, like a white noise machine playing a sleepy whiteboard's worth of jargon. Finally, you drift back toward the equator, where Meganeura and cousins soared above ferns and horsetails. You settle above lush swamp, recalling how, in Section 1, you began this journey under a dragonfly wing shadow. It feels cyclical, like the forest itself is guiding you to where it all began, an equatorial garden of giant bugs. You let your eyelids flutter in that warm current, surrendering to the rhythm of your own heartbeat mingling with the memory of flapping wings. But before you slip away, you note one more curious absence: offshore islands near the paleo-equator, which would one day become parts of Europe's Carboniferous archipelago. Modern maps show such islands missing from the fossil record entirely. No Meganeura, no trackways, not even the occasional roach imprint. Perhaps those islands were too low, too flood-prone, made of rapidly eroding sediments that didn't capture fossils. Or maybe, as a scholar once quietly whispered, episodic marine transgressions resulted in diagenetic conditions unfavorable for organic preservation. In plain sleep-time terms, rising seas washed away potential fossils before they could form. It's a lullaby of uncertainty that lets you drift. Galaxies of debate scattered across the fossil record, each waiting for someone to piece them together. You gaze down, letting the details blur. You see equatorial mega-insect paradises, temperate refuges where only smaller bugs endured, arid interiors devoid of giant crawlers, and icy latitudes too cold for even a miniature centipede. It's a patchwork quilt of life's possibilities and limitations, stitched by climate, oxygen, geography, and sheer chance. Even now, faint echoes of those giant wings ripple around you, carrying the lessons of survival and extinction, dispersal and refuge. As the last fragments of Arthropleura tracks fade from your vision, and the memory of six-winged Paleodictyoptera drifts into twilight, you feel your consciousness slipping into dreams. It's as if the world's distribution map folds into itself, folding you into the next realm of sleep. Soon, you'll awaken, the Carboniferous swamps replaced by your bedroom's familiar shadows. But for now, in this half-awake reverie, you carry the knowledge that giant bugs once roamed nearly everywhere, except where they simply couldn't. leaving behind silent blanks that speak of ancient climates and vanished habitats. You exhale, and as the world dissolves into drowsiness, you murmur an echo of the scholarly debates that will never fully settle. The paleolatitudinal and paleo-environmental controls on insect gigantism remain tantalizingly unresolved. Then you sink into that final hush, guided by the soft, universal lullaby of life's wondrous distribution, the places that thrived with colossal spiders of the sky, and the places echoing with their absence. You drift forward, deeper into the green-lit depths where shadows pool beneath towering horsetails, and the air hums with distant wing beats from Section 9's six-winged oddballs. Your mind, half dreaming, half listening, lingers on the question that's been creeping in since Section 6. How did these insect titans, with brains no bigger than a pea, manage feats of flight, hunting, and mating in a world full of equal-sized perils? You find yourself standing at the intersection of wonder and confusion, the path stretching before you like a neuron firing a question into the void. Beneath your feet, the carpet of decaying ferns and moss gently cushions each step. Every rustle in the undergrowth seems amplified, from the tiny click of a beetle's mandibles in Section 10 to the distant rasp of a cricket-like ancestor you met in Section 12. You realize that intelligence doesn't always correlate with size. Perhaps these Paleozoic critters had brains small in volume, but packed with enough wiring to handle giant wings and voracious appetites. You pause by a fallen log, its surface mottled with algae and lichen. Here, a modern entomologist might cross-section the head of an insect and marvel at the mushroom bodies, those paired lobes in the brain responsible for learning and memory. In living insects, mushroom bodies can be surprisingly large relative to brain size, giving them more processing power than you'd expect. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Fossil endocasts of Carboniferous insect heads show impressions of enlarged optic lobes, suggesting keen vision was key for hunting and navigation in dimly lit swamps. You press your palm against petrified stone nearby, imagining those optic lobes firing signals as Meganeuropsis swooped in Section 12, or Paleodictyoptera navigated six-winged flight in Section 9. It's astonishing, really. Here you stand, breathing in oxygen-soaked air that gave wings the fuel to drift like silent zeppelins, and you wonder how tiny neural circuits could coordinate wing beats and prey capture. Some researchers point to the dense packing of neurons in insect ganglia, clusters of nerve cells in each body segment, that allow reflexive actions like adjusting wing angles mid-flight. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Certain modern insects, like dragonflies, can process up to 300 images per second, translating into near superspeed perception. If Paleozoic dragonfly relatives were similar, Meganeura might have seen the forest in slow motion, pinpointing prey while looming over the canopy. The notion feels almost sci-fi. A giant-eyed predator seeing time itself stretch and fold. You step away from the log, feeling the hum of the forest's collective brain. Every antenna twitch, every compound eye facet, every leg joint snapping like a micro-localized data packet. Yet, no one truly knows how Paleozoic insect brains compared to modern ones. The open scholarly debate phrase drifts into your consciousness. The neural complexity and cognitive capacities of Carboniferous insects remain unresolved due to limited endocast data. In simpler terms, imagining a bug's brain from 300 million years ago is like reconstructing a smartphone's circuitry from melted plastic. You have fragments, but the wiring diagram is a guess at best. As you wander, the memory of Section 2's Meganeura gliding overhead resonates. You recall how it might have maneuvered with each wing controlled independently, or at least that's one theory. Others argue that large insects used a paired wing flight model, wings beating in sync, making neural processing simpler. You find yourself teasing out this debate in your mind. If each wing had to be controlled separately, the neural load skyrockets. But if wings moved in unison, a single central pattern generator, a rhythmic neural circuit, could keep them flapping smoothly. The scholarly echo murmurs. Whether Paleozoic mega insects exhibited independent wing neuromotor control, or relied on simplified paired wing patterns is still subject to debate. You exhale and chuckle softly, thinking how efficient their brains must have been, pruning any unnecessary synapses to focus on survival. Ahead, a pool of water glistens under a breach in the canopy. The surface is still, save for a lone mayfly nymph from section 11, its gills pulsing gently beneath the water. Adult mayflies only live for a day, lacking functional mouths, but as nymphs, they scuttle through aquatic realms, dodging tiny predators. You observe as it flicks its tail, propelled by reflex circuits in its minuscule brain, hardwired pathways triggering escape responses when vibrations pass through the water. It's another mainstream fact. Even today's mayfly Norpli rely on simple neural circuits for survival, circuits likely mirrored by their carboniferous cousins. You watch the nymph arc away with a flick of its tail, vanishing into underwater weeds. You settle on a mossy stone by the pool. Fern spores drift onto the surface, scattering like microscopic pollen. Each spore carried the potential to nurture the Marshall Islands of foliage above. You wonder if a giant insect ever rode one of these drifting spores, hitchhiking to a new feeding ground. The forest here seems alive in every sense, each spore and each wingbeat, a woven thread in a tapestry of life. A distant rustle draws your gaze upward to see a juvenile Arthropleura from section 4, scuttling along a fallen tree fern trunk. Its many legs move in perfect sequence, each segment's ganglion, those little neural knots, sending signals rhythmically to coordinate locomotion. In modern myriapods, ganglia can handle basic movement patterns independently of the brain. You imagine that in a creature 9 feet long, ganglia acted as decentralized processing hubs, allowing the beast to crawl confidently through undergrowth, while the tiny brain focused on more pressing business, detecting vibrations, scent trails, or potential threats. A fringe thought surfaces. Some scientists have speculated that Arthropleura might have possessed rudimentary decision-making abilities, choosing among food sources or shelter spots, suggested by the complexity of certain trace fossils. But evidence is scant, and the debate lingers. Deciphering sensory-driven navigational behaviors and decision-making in giant myriapods from ichnological data is speculative. In plainer sleepy speak, imagining a millipede deciding between decaying fern and fresh spore bed is charming, but there's no conclusive proof. Your attention drifts to a flicker in the corner of your eye. A cockroach cousin from section 8, a scarab-sized roach, skitters across the stone and pauses to survey its surroundings. Modern roaches, living fossils themselves, have neural ganglia that allow them to exhibit simple learning. They can remember mazes and associate odors with dangers. Fossil evidence suggests ancient roaches too may have possessed these training wheels of cognition, allowing them to adapt to shifting environments and avoid predators. A mainstream historical fact. Studies on living cockroaches show their optic lobes and antennal lobes handle separate streams of sensory data, processed by mushroom bodies for memory storage. If Paleozoic roaches had similar structures, they might have learned to avoid swampy pits or ambush points where amphibians from section 12 lay in wait. The echo of a scholarly debate surfaces. The extent of associative learning capabilities in early Blattodea remains untested due to lack of neuroanatomical preservation. You smile, picturing a fossil roach navigating a carboniferous maze etched in sandstone. Nearby, a fallen cluster of conifer-like branches creaks as something larger approaches. A Paleodictyoptera from section 9, 6 wings folded like origami, lands on a frond overhead. You tilt your head and watch it probe a droplet of resin-like sap, the earliest hints of what will become section 11's amber. Its brain, tiny, oval, nestled below those gleaming eyes, juggles flight control, sensory feedback, and foraging. In living insects, decentralized neural architecture offloads tasks to local ganglia. A leg can withdraw from heat without brain input. A wing can adjust its angle mid-flap through stretch receptors. You imagine Paleozoic insects had similar reflex arcs, enabling them to react to threats in milliseconds, even when their central brain processed other cues. You exhale softly, feeling your eyelids flutter as the forest's rhythm lulls you. Yet, the last piece of the puzzle tugs at you. Social behaviors. Modern social insects, ants, bees, termites, boast collective intelligence emerging from simple individual rules. Could carboniferous insects have formed early groups or swarms that exploited this synergy? Some fossil impressions hint at mass mortality sites, swarms of insects caught in a sudden storm or flash flood. Paleontologists wonder if these gatherings were accidental or ritualistic. Perhaps mass mating flights that drew predators like a moth to flame. A fringe hypothesis posits early termites might have formed primitive colonies, helped by fungal gardens, though no nests survive. The open debate phrase drifts in again. Evidence for eusociality or complex group behaviors in Paleozoic insect assemblages remains inconclusive. In your sleepy mind, that translates to maybe freakish clouds of giant bugs once buzzed together for mating. But we can't say for sure. You lean back against a moss-covered rock, letting the hush settle around you. All around, the forest's neural orchestra plays on. The pulse of wings overhead, the tap of myriapod legs on soft ground, the skitter of roaches and beetles. Every flick of an antenna, every tuning of a neural circuit, worked in concert so small brains could do big jobs, defy gravity, dodge predators, and catapult life forward. A faint sparkle in the murky water catches your eye. Tiny fish, early vertebrates from Section 7, glide beneath the surface, their eyes reflecting phosphorescent algae. You think about how, even in water, neural complexity mattered, detecting vibrations, targeting prey, avoiding eurypterids. Their brains, though more complex than a bug's, still rely on rapid reflexes, a shared theme across life forms. It strikes you that intelligence, in any shape or size, is simply a story life tells itself to keep going. Your breathing slows, matching the gentle thrum of the swamp. The pygmy night train of insects rocks you towards slumber. A last memory surfaces. Section 1's introduction, where the swamp felt alive with potential. Section 13's latitudinal map of giants and voids. Section 9's kaleidoscopic wings. Now all threads converge in this moment. A tapestry woven from the question of how tiny brains pulled off monumental feats. You whisper, as if testing the air. Brains the size of seeds, hearts pounding like drumbeats, wings slicing through oxygen-rich skies. Who knew so much power could fit in such a small package? The words drift away on a current of humid air, dissolving into the forest's lullaby. Your eyes flutter closed, the swamp's neural chorus guiding you into dreams where insect titans rule with brains no bigger than berries. In your half-dreaming mind, you see a mosaic of neuron-like pathways lighting up as wings beat, legs scuttle, and antennae quiver. You sense that, in this ancient forest, intelligence was not measured in cubic centimeters, but in the elegance of simple solutions. Ganglia for reflexes, mushroom bodies for memory, optic lobes for vision. Tiny brains perhaps, but big enough to shape worlds. Your pulse decelerates, your breath becomes a whisper, and the forest symphony fades into a single, sustained note. Here, in the hush of the Carboniferous, you surrender to sleep, carrying with you the mystery of how the smallest of minds orchestrated the grandest of lives. You tread carefully through a final stretch of the forest, the terrain shifting subtly, as if reality itself is folding in on you. Ferns thin, giving way to stubbier horsetails and emerging seed ferns, life already hinting at the future it will produce. The air still tastes of oxygen-rich mist, but you can sense a shift in the chemistry, a subtle cooling that carries a whisper of endings. It's time to witness how the grand age of giant insects finally concedes to new epochs, and how their echoes still linger in every bug you've ever swatted. Up ahead, a broad clearing glints with the soft sheen of morning dew. Through the hush, you catch the thrum of unseen wings, a memory of Section 2's meganeura and Section 9's six-winged oddball converging into a single aching hum. But as you step forward, you notice fewer silhouettes flicker in the canopy. There's no distant silhouette the size of a hawk cutting across golden green light, as was the case when you first met Meganeura. Instead, you see modest dragonfly-like shapes the size of sparrows, their flight patterns brisk and automated. A mainstream historical fact surfaces in your mind. By the late Permian, atmospheric oxygen had fallen to around 23%, roughly a third less than its Carboniferous peak, limiting the maximum size of arthropods because their passive tracheal system could no longer deliver enough oxygen to support gigantic bodies. You inhale that cooler air and feel the shift as your lungs register something missing, an exhale without the syrupy Carboniferous weight. Beneath your feet, the ground is firmer, less spongy. Decaying ferns are replaced by more sturdy lycopsid trunks and seed fern detritus. You recall from section 11 how resin was still a distant dream here. Now faint pockets of sticky sap glisten in bark crevices, hinting at embryonic defense mechanisms that will evolve into true amber. But tonight, those pockets won't capture any titanic roaches or colossal dragonflies. Instead, you see a small beetle no larger than a fingernail sheltering beneath a resin smear that will never solidify. The contrast stings. Macroarthropods have already receded into the shadows of extinction, leaving only smaller survivors in their wake. You follow a faint track winding through the clearing, a shallow groove in the mud so wide that it could only have been made by Arthropleura. Yes, here is the last known reviver, an echo of that couch-sized millipede you first met in section 4. You crouch beside the track and run a fingertip along its edge, cool, hardened now by arid air. A quirky tidbit drums in your thoughts. Some paleontologists suggest that late surviving arthropleurids may have torpedoed underground burrows to escape declining oxygen levels, eschewing the world above for subterranean refuge. We have only fragmentary trackways stretching into tunnels, but those tunnels peter out in mid-stride, as if the giant never truly re-emerged. It's as if their final gambit against extinction was to burrow into oblivion. You rise and scan the horizon. Where once tall lycopsid forests towered, you now see a patchwork of seed fern clusters and early gymnosperms, plants pre-adapted to drier landscapes. Those changes reflect the broader Permian climate, a world growing hotter, drier, and less hospitable to swamp-adapted arthropods. The mainstream fact echoes again. Terrestrial vertebrates, primarily early reptiles, diversified rapidly during the Permian, reshaping predation pressures. Amphibians no longer held dominance, and agile reptiles snapped up giant insects that could not adapt quickly enough. You remember the amphibian ambushes of section 12, but now the amphibians themselves have dwindled, replaced by reptilian predators with sharper claws and faster reflexes. A distant crunch signals movement. You turn to see a juvenile reptile, likely a dimetrodon-like pelycosaur, sniffing around near a stump. It's no dedicated insectivore, but it will opportunistically seize anything slow enough to catch. That thought brings a flash of sorrow. The grand bug giants you followed through haze, ponds, and midnight hums, now hunted by creatures you once deemed minor players. But evolution spares no one. There's no time to pity. You move on, sensing that, moment by moment, you're leaving the age of insect titans behind. As you cross a belt of ancient horsetails now brown and brittle, you spot the glint of a roach skittering across a flat stone, a small, paleo-blatted ancestor, robust and alert, reminiscent of the roaches from sections 8 and 12. Now, its shape is more modern, streamlined for speed rather than bulk. You crouch low, watching as it veers under moss, antennae quivering, a living link between the world that was and the one becoming. It steps over the fossilized track of a long-extinct Eurypterid from section 7, as if oblivious to the ghosts below. The open scholarly debate phrase drifts gently. The precise timing and mechanisms of insect lineage replacements across the Permian mass extinction event remain unresolved due to patchy fossil records. In other words, scientists still argue about exactly how and when certain bug families vanished, while others endured. leaving behind puzzle pieces waiting to be slotted together. You press onward, the vegetation thinning, replaced by rocky outcrops and stunted gymnosperm shrubs. Here, an old trackway of tiny insect legs wraps around a stone, one of the only remaining arthropod traces in this transitional world. It freezes your breath, a reminder that even as giants fade, life persists in miniature. You reflect back on Section 10's shale outcrop, where countless insects left perfect wing imprints, and contrast it with this sparse, echoing terrain. Those lush fossil beds exist only downstream of this place, buried under millennia of sediment. Now, you're walking on the lips of that buried history. The ground begins to slope upward toward a ridge crowned with early seed fern groves. As you ascend, the air dries, carrying a faint tang of resin and pine. You sense that soon this place, too, will give way to drier Triassic landscapes, where insects will find new niches, but will never again reach Carboniferous proportions. You pause at the crest and look back on the forest you've traversed, a tapestry of lilies, ferns, horsetails, gymnosperms, and the skeletal outlines of life's grandeur. It's a vista of vanishing giants. A low chitter draws your gaze forward to a clearing where the first Triassic insects have begun to emerge. A group of small cockroaches, mayflies, and primitive orthopterans that bear the hallmarks of modern lineages. They flit from plant to plant, oblivious to the world they inherit. Their bodies, no larger than a coin, are a monument to change. Giant relatives have vanished, and in their place, these nimble survivors inherit both the ecological niches and the oxygen-scarce skies. You step into the clearing, feeling the soft crunch of fallen needles underfoot. A wind stirs, carrying pollen from gymnosperms, some of the earliest conifers, that will come to dominate forests in the next era. The hum of insect life is quieter here, higher pitched, less omnipresent than the deep resonate drone you've known. It's a new symphony, rapid wing beats, quick leg clicks, and a shrill chorus of mating calls. Where once the symphony was dominated by the bass line of giant wings, now a trill of smaller insect voices fills the air. Your heartbeat slows as you watch these small innovators move in fluid arcs, light enough to dance on early morning rays. They carry the genetic legacies of Carboniferous ancestors, but bear bodies attuned to leaner oxygen. You remember the whispered speculation from Section 6. Some bugs may have evolved muscle-driven tracheal pumps to eke out breaths in thinning air. Perhaps these Triassic insects refined those adaptations, enabling wings to beat furiously without causing exhaustion. A scholarly note lingers. Functional adaptations in insect respiratory systems post-Carboniferous remain under debate due to limited direct evidence. In plainer terms, no one knows exactly how they managed the leap from bulk to nimbleness, but it's clear they did. In the clearing's center, you spot a small beetle feeding on a seed fern cone, a behavior mirrored by modern seed beetles millions of years later. You recall from Section 6 how beetles once shredded decaying plant matter to fuel nutrient cycles. Now, some edge into new roles, nibbling on living seeds and wood, marking the dawn of insect-plant coevolution that will define terrestrial ecosystems for ages to come. A sudden rustle draws your gaze to a juvenile proto-bee ancestor, likely one of the earliest pterigotan pollinators, buzzing near a primitive gymnosperm flower surrogate. Pollination as a concept is nascent here. Conifers rely mainly on wind for fertilization, but a few adventurous insects sample plant fluids. It's a quirky tidbit that among these early pollinators, small bristles on their legs may have carried pollen grains, hinting at the coevolutionary leaps to come. Yet, scant fossils pin this down. The debate lingers. Origins of insect-mediated pollination in Paleozoic plants remain contentious due to fragmentary evidence. But you see the hint in that insect's cautious dance around the cone. You let your shoulders relax, letting the weight of extinction and evolution settle around you. Giant insects have faded, but their descendants, small, adaptable, and cunning, carry echoes of a world lost. Every flit, buzz, and click you now hear is a ghostly pulse of carboniferous grandeur, smuggled into the ages by tiny survivors. As you turn to leave the clearing, you cast one last look at the silhouette of a small dragonfly, no larger than a sparrow, perched on a seed fern branch. Its compound eyes glint with a wisdom inherited from a titanic ancestor, capable of drone-like precision. In that moment, you realize the giant insect's reign is over, but their spirit lingers in every flapping wing and each segmented leg that scuttles at your feet. You step back onto the ridge, where the wind carries you forward toward the next chapter. A Triassic sky ruled by small but resilient insects. A legacy shaped by oxygen, predation, and evolutionary ingenuity. And though the carboniferous giants are gone, you know their ghosts endure in every insect that whirs past on a summer evening. Now the forest shifts into a softer rhythm, the world's edges blurring as you drift backward from that clearing of Triassic smallness. Your steps become lighter, the air gentler, almost silken, wrapping around you like the closing lines of a lullaby. The ferns behind you recede into whispering green shapes. Horsetails become gentle, swaying reeds. In this moment, you feel as though you glide away from the past, carried by a spiraling current of memory and the hum of tiny wings. Let your thoughts relax. Feel the gentle rise and fall of your chest as cool air filters into lungs unburdened by humid frenzy. Hear the distant echo of insect wings beating in patterns you no longer need to chase. The forest's chorus has softened. The bass of massive wings is gone, replaced by a delicate high-toned trill, like a violin fading into rest. Close your eyes if you wish, and sense the slightest breeze brushing your skin, a final gift from a world that once soared under dragonfly wings wider than your bed. Imagine the stardust of those insect ghosts shimmering in the twilight of your mind, each tiny sparkle a memory of denticulate wings brushing moss, of clacking mandibles on decaying logs, of random six-winged choreography in moonlit glades. You are safe now, floating in that lull between waking and dreaming. The fear of titanic insects hunting in murk has faded. You need only carry their legacy in gentle pulses of wonder. Let your muscles relax, melting into a state of sweet repose. Each breath is a soft exhale of ancient oxygen, transformed into quiet peace. As your consciousness drifts, feel the comforting thought that every beetle you see in your yard, every moth that flutters to your window, is a descendant of those grand titans. Their legacy lives on in tiny, almost indiscernible hums that shape the air around you. Let that truth rock you gently, cradling you in a blanket woven from the faintest echoes of prehistoric forests. Sleep now, untroubled by claws, wings, or giant shadows. The world has moved on, and so can you. Sweet dreams.